every bank account I owned. Savings, brokerage, my primary checking, even the secondary account I had opened just for wedding expenses. I reset passwords, enabled multi-factor authentication, revoked shared permissions, froze outgoing transfers, and flagged 3 vendors with my bank's fraud department. By 11:43, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. At 12:07, my sister Victoria was pounding on my condo door in downtown Chicago, her engagement ring flashing under the hallway lights like a warning signal. "You ruined my wedding!" she screamed the moment I opened it. Ethan stood behind her, jaw tight, eyes darting. My parents were in the hallway too, breathless and furious, as if they had rushed over to extinguish a fire I had started. I didn't argue. I walked to my dining table, lifted a thick stack of printed statements, and dropped 67 pages in front of them. $120,000, every transfer, every withdrawal, every diamond bracelet, private tasting menu, yacht deposit, and crypto gamble. The room went silent. And for the first time in 18 months, I wasn't the selfish little sister. I was the only one in control. Victoria pushed past me without waiting for an invitation. She looked different up close, mascara smudged, lips trembling, but not from sadness, from rage. "The venue canceled," she said. "The yacht company rejected the deposit. Vendors are calling non-stop. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Ethan stepped in behind her, lowering his voice as if reason would win where volume failed. "You froze accounts during active transactions. That's reckless." My mother's eyes scanned the pages on the table but didn't focus on the numbers. "Isabella, how could you humiliate your sister like this?" Humiliate. That word echoed in my head. I pulled out a chair and sat down slowly. "Do you know how much has been withdrawn?" My father frowned. "You agreed to help with the wedding." "I agreed to limited access," I said. "Not unlimited withdrawal." Victoria grabbed the top sheet. "This isn't what it looks like." "Then explain it," I replied evenly. She flipped through the pages, her confidence cracking with every highlighted line. Emerald Coast Consulting, $12,000, a vendor that didn't exist in any business registry I could find. Ethan avoided looking at that page. "Crypto exchange transfer," I continued, tapping another section. $7,500 at 2:14 in the morning, another for $15,000, and another. "It was an investment," Ethan snapped. "You work in finance. You understand leverage." "I understand documentation," I said. My father picked up one page, squinting at the totals. "This can't be right." "It is," I said. 18 months, $120,000. Victoria's voice shifted from fury to accusation. "You're doing this because you're jealous. You've always resented that That you what?" I asked quietly. She didn't finish the sentence, because we both knew the rest, that she was the golden child, the one who could make mistakes and still be applauded, the one whose risks were called passion, whose chaos was called creativity. And I was the stable one, the reliable one, the one who could absorb the cost. Ethan finally spoke again. "You're overreacting. We were consolidating expenses. Weddings are complicated." "So are forged signatures," I said. The word landed harder than any number. My mother inhaled sharply. "Forged?" I pulled out another page from a separate folder and placed it beside the statements. Draft power of attorney, my name printed neatly at the top, a signature at the bottom that was not mine. The room felt smaller. Victoria's face drained of color. "That was precautionary. You've been stressed. We were just preparing in case I became unstable," I finished for her. Silence. Ethan looked at the floor. My father's hand trembled slightly over the paper. For a moment, no one spoke. The Chicago skyline shimmered through my windows behind them, bright and indifferent. "You were going to petition for temporary financial oversight," I said. "You discussed psychiatric evaluation in emails. You drafted co-ownership applications for my condo." My mother shook her head as if she could physically deny the words away. "This is family. You don't take family to court." "I didn't," I said. You brought court into my home the day you forged my name." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "You locked everything without warning. The yacht company called me screaming. Do you know how humiliating that is?" I let that question hang. Do you know how humiliating it is to find a draft guardianship petition with your name on it? Do you know how humiliating it is to be introduced as the financial backbone of a wedding you never agreed to fund? Do you know how humiliating it is to sleep in your own guest room while your master bedroom becomes someone else's bridal suite? "I locked my accounts," I said calmly. "Because I am the primary owner. You had secondary access. That access is revoked, permanently." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You can't prove intent." I met his eyes. "I don't need intent. I have documentation." Victoria slammed the papers back onto the table. "So what now? You're going to sue your own sister?" "Yes," I said. The word surprised even me with how steady it sounded. "You have 30 days to repay the full amount," I continued. "If not, I file civil litigation for financial fraud and identity misrepresentation." My father stared at me as if I had crossed some invisible line. "You're choosing money over blood." "No," I replied quietly. "I'm choosing truth over manipulation." The argument fractured after that. Victoria shouted. My mother cried. Ethan muttered about lawyers and escalation. My father repeated words like extreme and unnecessary. But the power dynamic had shifted. They weren't debating whether the money had been taken. They were debating whether I had the right to stop it. Eventually, Victoria stormed out first. Ethan followed, shooting me a look that was more calculation than anger. My parents lingered in the doorway. My mother whispered, "You're breaking this family apart." I held the door open. "It was already breaking," I said. When the door finally closed, the silence inside my condo felt different. Not empty, controlled. I walked back to the table and ran my hand over the 67 pages. Venue deposit, $5,000. That was the first transfer, 18 months ago. At the time, it had felt small, temporary, sisterly. 3 months, that was the deal. They had needed a place to stay before the wedding, a short bridge between leases, a supportive gesture. I had just sold my startup equity stake. I had built my first serious investment portfolio. I was saving for a townhouse before I turned 33. I had space. I had stability. I had said yes. Because that's what good sisters do. I didn't know that yes would turn into shared account access. That shared access would turn into quiet transfers. That quiet transfers would turn into crypto losses, luxury rentals, and legal drafts with my forged signature. I picked up the top page again. $5,000. That was the first crack. Back then I hadn't seen it as betrayal. I had seen it as family. And that was my first mistake. 18 months earlier, the wire transfer hit my account on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk in my condo, still in work clothes, when the notification popped up on my phone. The sale of my startup equity had finally closed. The number looked surreal for a second. More zeros than I'd ever seen attached to my name. It wasn't generational wealth. It wasn't private jet money. But it was enough. Enough to build a real investment fund. Enough to create a 6-month emergency reserve without anxiety. Enough to finally start looking seriously at townhouses in Evanston instead of just bookmarking them. For the first time at 32, I felt stable. Not lucky. Stable. I poured a glass of wine that night and sat on my balcony overlooking the Chicago skyline. The city lights flickered in the distance, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. My finances were clean. My accounts were organized. Every dollar had a purpose. That weekend, Victoria called. She didn't waste time with small talk. "We're engaged," she said, breathless and triumphant. I smiled despite myself. "Congratulations," Ethan came on the line seconds later, his voice smooth and confident. "We're thinking Napa, vineyard ceremony, something elegant." Napa. I did the math in my head automatically. Venue, catering, travel, accommodations, designer gown, destination honeymoon. Elegant was expensive. A week later, we celebrated at a high-end steakhouse in River North. Victoria glowed across the table, diamond catching every reflection of candlelight. Ethan charmed the waiter, charmed my parents, charmed the entire room. He talked about entrepreneurial ventures, without ever specifying what those ventures were. He talked about timing, about market cycles, about opportunity. My father nodded approvingly. My mother squeezed Victoria's hand like she had just won something. I asked one practical question. "What's the budget?" Victoria waved it off. "It'll work itself out." Ethan grinned. "We're building a life. You can't nickel and dime vision." Nickel and dime vision. I sipped my wine and said nothing. 2 weeks later, Victoria called me again. This time she was crying. "Our lease is ending sooner than we thought," she said. "The landlord sold the building. We just need a place for a little while, 3 months max, until after the wedding." 3 months. It sounded reasonable, temporary, structured. Ethan chimed in from the background. "It would really help us stabilize. We don't want to rush into another lease before the wedding." That word again. Stabilize. My parents called that evening. "You have space," my father said. "It's just practical." "Family supports family," my mother added gently. "You've done so well. Now it's your sister's turn." I stood in my kitchen, staring at the marble countertop I had chosen myself, paid for myself. I valued my routines, my privacy, my order. But 3 months wasn't forever. "Okay," I said. 3 months!" Victoria screamed in relief. "You're the best!" I didn't correct her. Move-in day came with suitcases, garment bags, and more wedding binders than I thought physically possible. Ethan brought expensive whiskey instead of rent money. "For the house," he said with a wink. It was my house. But I let that slide too. At first, it felt almost fun. Planning energy filled the condo. Fabric samples draped over chairs. Venue photos spread across my dining table. Victoria stood in my living room describing floral arches and string quartets. Ethan paced with his phone, negotiating with vendors. I tried to treat it like background noise. Then came the first ask. "We're just short on the venue deposit," Victoria said one evening, sitting across from me at the kitchen island. "5,000. We'll pay it back after the wedding gifts come in." 5,000 was manageable. Temporary. I transferred it from a secondary checking account I rarely used. Victoria hugged me like I had saved her life. A few days later, she approached me again, tone casual. "To make things easier," she said, "why don't we create shared access to a wedding expense account, just so we can track everything transparently?" The word transparently disarmed me. I opened a sub-account under my primary bank profile. I gave her secondary access with capped transaction limits. I explained the restrictions clearly. "This is temporary," I said. "Of course," she replied. That night, I received 2 small notifications, charges under $100 each. Vendor verification, Ethan explained when I mentioned it. They test the link before charging the full amount. It made sense. On paper, weeks passed. Wine tasting event for 20 guests. Designer gown alteration deposit. Luxury SUV rental for site visits. The numbers began climbing faster than I expected. At dinner one night, I asked lightly, "Do we really need this level of spending?" Victoria's smile tightened. "It's once in a lifetime." Ethan leaned back. "You've got this covered, right?" Covered. The word unsettled me. I hadn't agreed to cover anything. I had agreed to help. At 2:14 one morning, my phone lit up. Crypto exchange transfer, $7,500. I walked into the kitchen, heart pounding. Ethan sat at the counter with his laptop open. He didn't look startled to see me. "It's arbitrage," he said calmly. "Short-term opportunity. We'll flip it before the wedding." "You used the wedding account," I said. "It's all connected," he replied. The next day, I requested vendor invoices and real-time access to the crypto account. Victoria reacted immediately. "Do you think we're stealing from you?" The word stealing had never left my mouth, but it was clearly in hers. My mother called that evening. "You're making your sister feel humiliated," she said. Humiliated. The pattern was subtle, but it was there. Concern for her, correction for me. By the third month, there was no conversation about moving out. When I mentioned it gently, Victoria's eyes filled with hurt. "You don't want us here?" That wasn't what I had said, but it was what she needed to hear. 3 months became 4. 4 became 6. My master bedroom turned into her bridal planning suite. Dresses hung in my closet. My shoes were boxed and stacked in the guest room. Wedding invitations listed my condo address under their names. Packages arrived addressed to Ethan. One Sunday afternoon, I sat at my desk and exported the transaction history for the sub-account. I expected to see maybe $25,000 total. The number stared back at me. $28,000. In 6 months, more than double what I had mentally estimated. And several transfers routed through third-party processors instead of direct vendors. I searched one vendor listed as Emerald Coast Consulting. No business registration, no website, no LinkedIn presence. When I asked Ethan about it, he shrugged. "Private contractor," Victoria snapped. "Why are you auditing your own sister?" Auditing. Another word I hadn't used. That night, as I lay in the guest room that used to be my office, I replayed every conversation. "You're overthinking. You're stressed. You don't understand the emotional side. If I started doubting my clarity, they gained leverage. If they gained leverage, they gained control." I checked the account again before sleeping. Another crypto transfer. Smaller this time, but consistent. Then I noticed something new, a pending request. An external account linked for future transactions. The name attached wasn't Victoria's, it was Ethan's. I stared at the screen for a long time. This was supposed to be 3 months, a favor, a gesture. Instead, my home had become a staging ground. My account had become a pipeline. And I was no longer sure whether I was helping my sister plan a wedding or financing something I didn't fully understand. I closed my laptop slowly. For the first time, generosity didn't feel noble. It felt dangerous. By month 4, the shared sub-account no longer felt temporary. Victoria stopped calling it your account and started calling it the wedding account. The shift in language was small, almost invisible, but it carried weight. Ethan no longer asked before logging in. He didn't even pretend to hesitate. I would walk past the kitchen island and see my bank dashboard open on his laptop like it belonged there. I told myself I had set transaction caps. I had built safeguards. I understood risk. I also understood exhaustion. Work at the firm had intensified. I was leading a complex risk analysis for a client restructuring a major portfolio. Long nights blurred into early mornings. When I came home, the condo was loud with music, wedding talk, and champagne corks. It was easier to ignore small discomforts than start a fight. The expenses began shifting. Wine tasting event for 20 guests, upgraded to a private vineyard experience. Diamond bracelet labeled bridal accessory. Luxury SUV rental extended another week for venue scouting. I scanned the line items while reheating leftovers at midnight. This wasn't the original budget Victoria had shown me. At dinner one evening, I tried again. "Do we really need the private tasting?" I asked carefully. The standard package looked fine. Victoria didn't even look up from her phone. "It's once in a lifetime." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "You're not worried, right? You've got this covered." That phrase again. Covered. I didn't respond. I made a mental note instead. 2:14 in the morning. My phone lit up again. Crypto exchange transfer. $7,500. The glow of the notification reflected off my ceiling in the dark. I sat up slowly, heart pounding. I walked into the kitchen. Ethan was there, laptop open, screen filled with green and red graphs. He didn't flinch when he saw me. "It's a short-term arbitrage opportunity," he said before I asked. "We'll make it back before the wedding." "You used the wedding account," I replied. "It's fluid capital," he said calmly. "We're building momentum." We. I stood there in silence, staring at numbers I didn't authorize. The next morning I requested vendor invoices and full access to the crypto exchange account. Victoria reacted instantly. "Why are you acting like we're criminals?" she asked, voice rising. "I'm asking for transparency," I said. "You think we're stealing from you?" I never said that word, but she did. My mother called that night. "Victoria feels humiliated," she told me. "She said you're interrogating her." Interrogating. Another word I hadn't used. The narrative was shifting subtly. Concern for her. Correction for me. Weeks passed. Wedding planners visited the condo regularly. I was introduced as the financial brain behind this operation. They laughed when Victoria said it. I didn't. At 6 months, I stopped correcting people when they referred to the condo as Victoria and Ethan's place. It was easier than explaining. One Sunday afternoon, I opened my laptop and exported the transaction history from the sub-account. I expected maybe 30,000. The total surprised me. 48,000, almost half my intended down payment fund. I scrolled through the details carefully. Several transfers routed through third-party processors. 2 charges labeled Emerald Coast Consulting, $8,200. I searched the business registry. Nothing. I searched LinkedIn. Nothing. I typed the name into 3 different databases. No results. When I asked Ethan about it that evening, he shrugged. Private contractor, destination coordination. Victoria rolled her eyes. "You don't need to audit every detail." Audit. There it was again. The language framed me as rigid, suspicious, cold. I went to bed unsettled. At 2 a.m, I checked the account again. Another crypto transfer, smaller, but consistent. I began documenting everything, screenshots, timestamps, exported CSV files. I didn't accuse, I observed. One afternoon I came home early from work. The master bedroom door was open. My closet half emptied. Victoria's gown hung from the center rack, protected in a garment bag that cost more than my first car payment. My side of the dresser had been cleared to make room for makeup palettes. I stood in the doorway quietly. This had been my room. Now it looked like a bridal showroom. Later that evening, at dinner, Victoria announced rehearsal dinner plans. My name appeared on the budget spreadsheet under remaining contribution. I hadn't agreed to that number. When I said so gently, my father spoke up over speakerphone. "You're the most stable," he said. "It makes sense." Stability equaled obligation. That was the formula. I started reconciling the account weekly instead of monthly. The total crossed 60,000, then 70. The numbers moved faster than conversations. One night, I received a credit monitoring alert. Hard inquiry. Private lender. Application listed as joint household liquidity support. I never applied. The secondary contact listed was Ethan. I stared at the notification for a long time. I confronted him the next morning. "It was exploratory," he said lightly. "Nothing binding." "Did you list this condo as joint property?" "Well, technically we all live here." "Technically," Victoria chimed in. "You've been so stressed lately. You're overreacting." Overreacting. Stressed. Unstable. The words were starting to repeat. At a family dinner with relatives visiting from out of state, Victoria laughed about how I forgot to eat when I was busy. Ethan added that I isolated myself too much. Concern flickered across faces at the table. Concern replaces admiration quickly when seated correctly. Late that night, I logged in again. Total withdrawals had reached nearly $80,000. And then I saw something else. Professional evaluation services. $4,200. Vendor category, medical consulting. I stared at the screen. Medical consulting? There had been no appointments, no visits. Another line item. Legal document preparation. $2,100. My stomach tightened. I replayed conversations in my head, comments about stress, comments about burnout, jokes about high achievers cracking. It felt less like teasing, more like groundwork. The next morning I left for work early. Halfway to the elevator, I realized I had forgotten my laptop charger. I turned back quietly. As I approached the door, I heard voices from inside. Victoria's voice, low. "He doesn't think she'll fight it." Pause. "She hates conflict." Ethan responded, too quiet for full clarity. Victoria continued, "Once it's signed, she won't even know what she agreed to." I didn't open the door. I didn't confront them. I stepped back into the hallway instead, because now something felt different. This wasn't just spending. It wasn't even just deception. It sounded like planning. I returned to the office that day and pulled the transaction logs again, $83,000. Then I noticed something new. A pending external account link, registered under Ethan's name, waiting for authorization from the primary holder. Me. They had hit the cap. They were trying to expand access. That was the moment generosity stopped feeling like a virtue. It felt like a vulnerability. That night, I lay awake in the guest room that used to be my office. I listened to Victoria laughing softly in what had been my bedroom. I listened to Ethan pacing on the balcony, voice low and controlled. I thought about the words I had overheard. She won't fight it. She hates conflict. They had mistaken my calm for weakness, my discipline for passivity, my generosity for endless supply. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since they moved in, I didn't feel confused. I felt alert. Something was unfolding inside my own home, and I was done being the last one to see it. The morning after I overheard Victoria whispering that I wouldn't fight it, I made coffee like nothing had changed. I moved through the kitchen calmly, methodically, as if I hadn't heard every word through the hallway the night before. Victoria floated in wearing silk pajamas, scrolling through floral mock-ups on her phone. Ethan followed, already dressed, already alert. "You're up early," Victoria said lightly. "Work," I replied. "Normal." That was the strategy. If they believed I suspected something, they would accelerate. If they believed I remained unaware, they would continue. And continuation meant evidence. At my desk later that morning, I reopened every transaction log from the past 9 months. I cross-referenced dates, crypto transfers aligned with vendor shortfalls. Legal document preparation charges appeared shortly after major losses. The medical consulting fee had occurred the same week Victoria began joking publicly about my stress levels. It wasn't random, it was layered. At lunch, I stepped outside my office building and called the law firm listed on the draft power of attorney document. I didn't identify myself at first. "I'm inquiring about temporary guardianship filings," I said neutrally. The receptionist confirmed they handled such matters. I asked whether a preliminary inquiry had been initiated under my name. There was a pause. "I can't disclose client information," she said carefully. But the hesitation was enough. Something existed. That evening, the performance continued. Victoria approached me while I was reviewing spreadsheets at the dining table. "You've seemed distant," she said gently. "You've been working too hard." Ethan leaned against the counter. "Burnout is common in finance. Maybe you should take time off." I watched them both. Concern on the surface. Assessment underneath. The words weren't about my well-being, they were about positioning. Later that week, my parents hosted a small family dinner with relatives visiting from Milwaukee. Victoria casually mentioned how forgetful I'd been lately. Ethan added that I barely slept. My aunt asked me softly if I was feeling overwhelmed. I realized then that witnesses were being gathered. Not formally, but socially. If someone needed to testify about my stability, they were seeding impressions. That night, I received an automated email from my brokerage account. "Your password has been successfully reset." I hadn't reset it. I logged in immediately. Access still worked. But the recovery phone number had changed. It listed Victoria's number. My hand stayed steady, but something inside me shifted permanently. The next morning, I confronted her privately. "There was a password reset on my brokerage account," I said calmly. "Your number is listed as recovery." She blinked twice. That must be a glitch. Ethan chimed in from behind her. Maybe you clicked something by accident. The tone was almost patronizing, as if explaining a minor tech issue to someone less competent. I looked directly at Victoria. Did you access my brokerage account? She smiled thinly. Why would I? Why would she? The question lingered in the air like smoke. By month 10, the condo no longer felt like my home. Wedding invitations arrived addressed to Victoria and Ethan at my address. Packages piled near the door under both their names. My building concierge greeted Ethan as if he were the primary resident. One afternoon, I returned home early and found my office rearranged. The desk moved, my filing cabinet pushed into the corner, the space staged as a guest suite for bridesmaids. My financial files were stacked carelessly against the wall. I stood in the doorway quietly. No one asked, no one warned. It had simply been decided. At dinner that evening, Victoria presented an updated wedding spreadsheet. My name appeared under projected remaining balance, a larger number than before. I never agreed to that, I said evenly. You said you'd support us, she replied. I said 3 months and limited access. My father, on speakerphone, said, You're the most stable. It makes sense. Stable meant absorbent. Stable meant endless. Stable meant silent. Later that night, I logged into the sub-account again. $92,000. The total no longer startled me. It confirmed something. A pattern. Then I noticed a charge labeled Harbor Lock Storage, monthly recurring. I searched the address. High-security storage facility downtown. Why would wedding planning require private storage? I didn't ask. Not yet. The next morning, while they were out meeting a florist, I walked into what used to be my bedroom. Victoria's vanity drawer was slightly open. Inside, a manila folder. I didn't open it then. Not yet. Instead, I closed the drawer and stepped back. Timing mattered. That afternoon, my father called again. You're overthinking this, he said. Victoria is emotional. Don't trigger her. Trigger. The vocabulary of fragility was being assigned to her. The vocabulary of instability was being assigned to me. That evening, Ethan joked at dinner about high achievers cracking under pressure. Victoria added that I needed a vacation. My mother suggested therapy. The suggestion wasn't cruel, it was strategic. If I agreed, it reinforced their narrative. If I refused, it reinforced their narrative. I excused myself early and went into the guest room. I pulled up state guidelines for temporary guardianship petitions. Requirements included statements from family members, documentation of impaired judgment, professional evaluation. The medical consulting charge echoed in my mind. I opened the sub-account transaction log again. Another transfer attempt. $12,000. Destination, Emerald Coast Consulting. Pending. Requiring primary authorization. They had hit the limit. They were pushing boundaries. The next morning, I left for work early. Halfway to the elevator, I remembered my badge. I returned quietly. As I approached the bedroom, I heard Ethan's voice on the balcony. Once everything's consolidated, we won't need her approval anymore. Pause. A low laugh. My chest didn't tighten. It steadied, consolidated. Approval. They weren't planning a wedding. They were planning consolidation. I stepped back into the hallway before they noticed me. I went to work, and for the first time since they moved in, I wasn't confused. I wasn't generous. I wasn't trying to keep peace. I was calculating. They thought I hated conflict. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought stability meant compliance. They were wrong. That night, I sat alone at my desk and wrote 2 columns on a blank page. What they have: shared access, family narrative, assumed trust. What I have: primary ownership, transaction records, draft documents, time. I closed the notebook slowly. The condo was loud again with wedding talk and laughter drifting down the hallway. But something had changed. They believed they were building leverage. They didn't realize they were building evidence. And I was no longer the last person in the room to understand what was happening. I was the only one preparing for what came next. By month 10, I no longer corrected anyone when they referred to the condo as Victoria and Ethan's place. It was easier to let the words slide than to stop and reassert ownership every time. My master bedroom was permanently theirs now. The bridal suite, Victoria called it. My dresses were folded into storage bins in the second bedroom, stacked beside bankers' boxes filled with financial reports I no longer kept in the open. The closet that once held my structured blazers and neatly arranged heels now held a couture gown wrapped in white silk. I told myself it was temporary. Temporary had stopped meaning anything. The social shift happened gradually. Caterer tastings were hosted in my dining room without consulting me about scheduling. Wine vendors dropped off sample crates and addressed Victoria as the homeowner. Bridesmaids came and went, leaving champagne glasses on my coffee table and makeup palettes on my bathroom counter. One afternoon during brunch, Victoria introduced me to her friends as the financial backbone of this wedding. They laughed. I didn't. I had started reconciling transactions weekly instead of monthly. Late at night, after everyone else had gone to sleep, I would sit at the kitchen island with my laptop open, exporting statements and highlighting patterns. Charges were no longer isolated spikes. They were rhythms, large vendor deposits followed by crypto transfers within hours. Luxury travel holds followed by third-party processing fees. The numbers were accelerating, 80,000, 87, 91. My down payment fund was shrinking in ways I hadn't explicitly agreed to. One Tuesday afternoon, I received a credit monitoring alert. Hard inquiry, private lender. Application listed as joint household liquidity support. Joint household. My name was listed as primary applicant. Ethan's name appeared as co-resident. I stared at the screen for a long time. I had not signed anything. That evening, I confronted him directly. "There's a credit inquiry in my name," I said, keeping my voice level. He didn't look alarmed. "It was exploratory," he replied. "Just testing financing options." "You listed this condo as joint property." "Well, technically we all live here." "Technically?" Victoria stepped in before I could respond further. "You've been so defensive lately," she said softly. "It's not healthy." Defensive. The word settled into the pattern with the others. Stressed, overreacting, burned out. The vocabulary was consistent. That night I opened the account again. $98,000. And then I saw a new recurring charge. Harbor Lock Storage. Monthly, high-end secure storage facility downtown. I searched the address. Private climate-controlled units. Document security advertised on the website. Why would wedding decorations require secure document storage? I didn't ask yet. Instead, I saved the invoice. The emotional erosion became clearer during small moments. One evening, I came home from work early and found Victoria hosting friends in the living room, music playing, champagne open. As I stepped inside, the conversation paused. One of her bridesmaids looked at me and asked, "Isabella, could you grab more ice?" In my own kitchen. I walked to the freezer quietly. No one apologized. No one corrected the assumption. Later that night, I checked the transaction logs again. One line item caught my attention. Professional evaluation services. $4,200. Vendor category, medical consulting. There had been no doctor visits, no appointments. 2 days later, another charge appeared. Legal document preparation. $2,100. The pieces were aligning too neatly to ignore. The following morning, I left for work early as usual. Halfway to the elevator, I realized I'd forgotten my laptop charger. I turned back. As I approached the condo door, I heard voices inside. Victoria's voice was low. "He doesn't think she'll fight it." Pause. "She hates conflict." Ethan responded in a tone I couldn't fully hear. Victoria continued. "Once it's signed, she won't even know what she agreed to." My pulse slowed. Not quickened. Slowed. I stepped away from the door and took the elevator down without entering. At the office, I closed my door and opened every statement from the last 12 months. The cumulative total crossed $100,000. 103, 107, 111. It wasn't one reckless splurge. It was systematic, structured. I examined the timeline against their conversations about my stress. Each time I questioned spending, the narrative intensified. Each time crypto losses spiked, comments about burnout increased. They weren't just spending money, they were building context. Later that week, I came home unexpectedly in the middle of the afternoon. Victoria and Ethan had stepped out. The condo was silent. For the first time in months, it felt like mine again. I walked into the master bedroom slowly. The vanity drawer was slightly open. Inside sat a manila folder. I hesitated only briefly before pulling it out. Inside were printed drafts. Application to add Victoria as co-owner to the condo. Power of attorney document with my name at the top. Signature line filled in. Not my handwriting. Attached were email exchanges between Victoria, Ethan, and a lawyer named Marcus Feldman. Phrases leapt off the page. Temporary financial oversight, stress-related instability, joint living arrangement justification. If Isabella shows resistance, psychiatric evaluation may support temporary guardianship. Guardianship! The word blurred for a moment before sharpening. This was not about wedding expenses. This was about control. Behind the legal drafts were copies of Harbor Lock storage receipts. Unit registered under Ethan's name. Purpose listed as document security. They weren't storing decorations. They were storing leverage. At the back of the folder was a handwritten note in Ethan's writing. She trusts family. Don't push too hard. After the wedding, it's easier. After the wedding, meaning after legal ties, after assets merged, after optics secured. I sat on the edge of what used to be my bed and felt something crystallize. Every dinner conversation about stress, every joke about burnout, every comment about high achievers cracking. It wasn't concern. It was groundwork. My phone vibrated in my hand. Another transfer attempt. $12,000. Destination, Emerald Coast Consulting. Pending, requiring primary authorization. They had reached the ceiling of what secondary access allowed. They were pushing for expansion. I photographed every page of the folder, front and back, close-ups of signatures, email headers, timestamps. Then I placed everything back exactly as I had found it. Drawer slightly open. Folder angled to the left. I washed my hands in the bathroom sink afterward. Not because they were dirty, because touching those documents felt contaminating. That evening at dinner, Victoria smiled brightly. "You've seemed calmer lately," she said. "I'm glad you're not overthinking things anymore." Ethan watched me carefully. I smiled back. For the first time in months, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't asking. I wasn't trying to preserve peace. I was preparing. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought I hated conflict. They thought stability meant silence. They were about to learn the difference between quiet and unaware. And this time, I wasn't the one being positioned. I was the one gathering proof. The morning after I found the folder in Victoria's drawer, I made breakfast like nothing had happened. Egg whites, black coffee, the same routine I followed every weekday. Victoria scrolled through seating charts at the kitchen island, humming under her breath. Ethan typed something on his phone, expression neutral. They looked relaxed. They believed they were still ahead. I moved quietly through the condo, memorizing their comfort. Emotion is loud, evidence is silent. I left for work at my usual time, badge clipped to my coat, posture steady. Halfway to the office, I pulled over into a quiet parking garage and reviewed the photos I had taken of the documents. The power of attorney draft, my forged signature, the email thread with Marcus Feldman. The phrase temporary guardianship appearing again and again like a legal refrain. My chest didn't tighten anymore. It cooled. At my desk, I closed my office door and began reconstructing the timeline. Crypto losses escalated in month 8. Legal document preparation appeared in month 9. Medical consulting fee appeared in month 10. Conversations about my stress intensified around the same time. The structure wasn't emotional, it was procedural. That afternoon, I called the law firm again, this time identifying myself. "I'd like to confirm whether any preliminary documents have been prepared in my name," I said calmly. There was a pause. "I'm sorry, I cannot disclose that information without a signed release," the receptionist replied. But the tone had shifted. There was recognition. Someone had discussed my name. That was enough. On my lunch break, I walked to the bank branch near my office. I requested extended transaction logs for the past 18 months. The compliance officer reviewed the request and raised her eyebrows at the volume of transfers routed through third-party processors. "Did you authorize external wallet linking?" she asked. "No," I said. She flagged the account for internal review. The phrase financial exploitation appeared in the notes. It didn't sound dramatic. It sounded factual. That evening, I returned home as if nothing had changed. Victoria was excited about a new florist proposal. Ethan poured himself a drink. I set my laptop down on the dining table and opened it deliberately. "Can we talk?" I asked. They both stiffened slightly. "What about?" Victoria said. "About the external account link request." Ethan's jaw tightened. "It was exploratory." "And the power of attorney draft?" I asked quietly. Silence. Victoria blinked rapidly. "That was precautionary." "Precautionary against what?" "You've been overwhelmed," she said. "We just wanted to protect you." "Protect me." "With a forged signature?" I asked. "It wasn't finalized," Ethan said quickly. "But it was drafted," I replied. They exchanged a glance. There it was. The moment the performance cracked. "You're twisting this," Victoria said, voice rising. "We were planning responsibly." "You were planning consolidation," I said. The word hung between us. Consolidation. Ethan looked at me sharply. "You've been paranoid lately," he said. "This is exactly why we were concerned." Concern. The narrative was predictable now. "You discussed psychiatric evaluation in emails," I said evenly. Victoria's face drained of color. "You went through my drawer," she whispered. "Yes." "You violated my privacy." I let that irony settle in the room. "You drafted legal control over my assets," I replied. "You forfeited privacy." My father called mid-conversation, as if summoned by tension. Victoria put him on speaker. "Isabella is spiraling," she said quickly. "She's accusing us of fraud." I spoke calmly into the phone. "There is a forged power of attorney draft with my name on it." Silence. My father exhaled slowly. "That was precaution," he said after a moment. "You've been under a lot of stress." There it was again, the reinforcement, the layering of witnesses. "I am not unstable," I said clearly, "and you will not file anything in my name." No one argued that they wouldn't. They argued that I was overreacting. Later that night, I reopened the transaction logs. The total had reached $120,000. $120,000. The number felt different now. It wasn't loss, it was leverage. I exported every transaction into a master spreadsheet. Date, vendor, amount, purpose. I cross-referenced crypto transfers with external wallet IDs. I documented every instance of third-party routing. The structure became undeniable. This wasn't chaotic spending, it was layered misdirection. At 2 a.m, another transfer attempt appeared. $15,000. Destination, Emerald Coast Consulting. Status, pending, authorization required from primary account holder. They had reached the ceiling again. Desperation was visible in the pattern. The next morning I called a compliance attorney recommended by a colleague. I brought printed copies of everything. The forged signature, the guardianship language, the transaction logs. He reviewed the document silently. "This is potential financial fraud," he said finally, "and attempted asset control." The words didn't shock me. They confirmed what I already knew. If they file first claiming mental instability, you would be defending yourself, he added. If you act first, you control the narrative. Control the narrative. That was the pivot point. I returned home that evening and found Victoria pacing. Why can't I access the account dashboard? She demanded. I restricted permissions, I replied. You can't just cut us off. I can, I said calmly. I am the primary holder. Ethan stepped closer. You're escalating this. No, I said, I'm correcting it. He stared at me for a long moment. You're making a mistake. I've already made one, I replied, letting you in. That night, I drafted a formal demand letter with my attorney's guidance. 30 days to repay $120,000. Failure to comply would result in civil litigation for fraud and identity misrepresentation. I didn't send it yet. Timing mattered. The following morning, before leaving for work, I logged into my account one last time. Another transfer attempt, $12,000. Declined automatically due to restricted access. Within minutes, my phone began to ring. Victoria, Ethan, my mother. I didn't answer. I watched the calls pile up. They believed I was panicking. They believed I was reacting emotionally. They didn't understand that I had already moved beyond emotion. By the time Victoria pounded on my door hours later, shouting that I had ruined her wedding, the decision had already been made. I wasn't going to wait for them to finish their plan. I was going to end it. They thought I hated conflict. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought stability meant compliance. They were about to learn that stability can also mean strategy. And strategy, when documented, is louder than any accusation they could make about my sanity. I closed my laptop and looked out at the Chicago skyline. 18 months ago, I had said yes because I believed family meant trust. Now I understood something else. Trust without boundaries is not loyalty. It's exposure. And exposure, when paired with forged documents and $120,000 missing, is no longer a misunderstanding. It's a case. The next move would not be a conversation. It would be a lock, and this time, I would not hesitate. The morning after I met with the attorney, I stopped pretending this was temporary. I woke before dawn, sat at my kitchen island, and opened every financial portal I owned. Savings account, primary checking, brokerage, sub-account labeled wedding expenses. I changed every password. Enabled multi-factor authentication on every login. Removed secondary viewing privileges. Revoked external wallet linking. I didn't rush. I moved with precision. At 7:43, I called my bank's fraud department. I need to report potential financial exploitation, I said. The representative's tone shifted immediately. She asked for dates, amounts, authorization history. I gave her everything. $120,000 over 18 months, repeated crypto transfers, third-party routing patterns, attempted expansion of transaction limits. She assigned a case number. The word official appeared in my mind like a door closing. After the call, I placed a full credit freeze across all major bureaus. Any new line of credit would require in-person verification with government identification. No more exploratory inquiries, no more technical glitches. Then I contacted building management. I need to confirm primary residency documentation, I said. They pulled up the file. Sole owner, Isabella Morgan. Secondary occupant access privileges had been logged for Ethan under temporary guest extension. I'm revoking that, I said. They asked if there was a dispute. There won't be for long, I replied. By 9 o'clock, every access point had narrowed. When Victoria woke and reached for her phone, the shift was immediate. I can't see the wedding account, she said from the bedroom. I restricted permissions, I answered from the kitchen. What do you mean restricted? It's no longer shared. She walked into the kitchen slowly. Her eyes scanned my face for hesitation. You can't just do that. I can, I said calmly. It's my account. Ethan appeared behind her. Why are you escalating this? He asked. I'm not escalating, I replied. I'm securing. He stepped closer. The yacht deposit bounced, he said. The venue called this morning. Why were you attempting a $15,000 transfer without my authorization? I asked. Silence. Victoria's face reddened. We needed to move quickly. You needed to ask, I said. My phone rang again. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. Within an hour, my parents were at the door. My father entered first, posture rigid. What is this nonsense? He demanded. You locked everything, my mother added. Victoria is hysterical. I placed a single sheet of paper on the table. The transaction summary total, $120,000. Do you know how much has been withdrawn? I asked. They stared at the number. That can't be accurate, my father said. It is, I replied. Victoria crossed her arms defensively. You agreed to support us. I agreed to limited access, I corrected. Ethan spoke quietly. You're making this about control. I am making it about control, I said. Mine. My father looked between us. You're overreacting. I am responding, I said. The bank called mid-argument. The compliance officer informed me that several transactions were being flagged for irregular routing. One vendor had no valid registration. Additional documentation might be required. I thanked her and hung up. The room felt heavier. Victoria's voice trembled. You reported us? I reported suspicious transactions, I said. You're humiliating me before my wedding, she snapped. I'm protecting my assets, I replied. Ethan's tone shifted. You can't prove intent. I don't need to, I said. I have documentation. Later that afternoon, after they left to cool down, I finalized the demand letter with my attorney. 30 days to repay the full amount. Failure to comply would result in civil litigation for financial fraud and identity misrepresentation. I printed the letter. I did not send it yet. I wanted them to attempt one more transfer. Documentation strengthens when behavior continues. At 5:30 that evening, I logged into the sub-account again. Another attempt, $12,000. Destination, Emerald Coast Consulting. Declined automatically. Secondary access suspended. My phone exploded within minutes. Victoria's voice came through the voicemail speaker. You ruined my wedding. Ethan followed with a text. Fix this now, my mother wrote. What are you doing to this family? I did not respond. At 6:15, the pounding on my door began. Victoria burst inside the moment I opened it. You did this, she said. Ethan stood behind her, face pale. My parents followed seconds later. The scene felt surreal. I walked to the dining table and placed the full 67 pages of statements in front of them, every transfer highlighted, every crypto exchange circled, every third-party vendor flagged. $120,000, I said. Silence fell like a physical weight. Victoria flipped through the pages rapidly. This isn't what it looks like. Then explain Emerald Coast Consulting, I said. Ethan didn't answer. I flipped to the legal document charges. Explain the power of attorney draft. My father's hand trembled slightly. You were going to petition guardianship, I continued. You discussed psychiatric evaluation. Victoria shook her head rapidly. It was precautionary. Against what? I asked. Against you losing control, Ethan muttered. I held his gaze. I never lost control. That was the difference. I had been generous, not incapable. Victoria's voice broke. You're destroying everything. No, I said quietly, I'm stopping it. My father finally spoke. You're choosing money over blood. I'm choosing boundaries over manipulation. The words surprised even me with their steadiness. I placed the printed demand letter on top of the statements. You have 30 days, I said. Full repayment, or I file. My mother gasped. You'd sue your own sister? Yes. The room felt smaller. Ethan stepped back slightly. Victoria's tears shifted from anger to fear. The narrative had changed. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was documented. After they left, the condo fell silent. I gathered the papers slowly and placed them in a labeled folder. For the first time in months, I walked into the master bedroom without hesitation. I opened the closet. My side still held only storage bins. But the space felt different. Reclaimed. I sat on the edge of the bed and exhaled. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought stability meant endless tolerance. They mistook calm for compliance. What they didn't understand was that discipline is not weakness, it is containment. And once containment breaks, it does not explode, it locks. The next move would not be emotional, it would be legal, and this time, I would not ask permission to protect what was mine. I did not sleep the night after they pounded on my door. I lay in the master bedroom, my bedroom again, and stared at the ceiling while the city hummed outside the windows. At 6 a.m, I got up and went straight to my desk. If they believed this was emotional, they were wrong. This was procedural. I opened every account I had ever linked to anything remotely shared. Primary checking, savings, brokerage, retirement portfolio, the sub-account that had once been labeled wedding expenses. I downloaded full transaction histories for the past 18 months, CSV files, PDF statements, raw data exports. I built a master spreadsheet, date, amount, vendor, routing path, authorization method. By 8:30, the total sat in bold at the top of the sheet. $120,000. Not approximate, not exaggerated, exact. Every line item documented. Crypto transfers mapped to wallet IDs, third-party processors flagged. Storage unit payments categorized. Legal preparation fees separated into their own column. The pattern was undeniable. This was not overspending. It was strategic misuse. At 9:15, I called my attorney. "I'm ready," I said. He asked only one question. "Are you prepared for the consequences?" "Yes." We scheduled an in-person meeting for that afternoon. Before leaving, I called the bank's compliance division again. "I need to formally dispute a series of transactions and request an internal fraud review," I said. The representative pulled up my case number. She asked if I believed the transactions were unauthorized. "I believe access was abused," I replied. That phrasing mattered. She placed a temporary hold on the sub-account pending investigation. She also flagged prior login attempts from devices not previously registered to me. When she read the timestamps, I recognized them. 2 a.m, 3:15, weekends when I had been out of town for work conferences. My jaw tightened. At 10:42, I placed a credit alert confirmation into my records folder. At 11, I contacted the 3 major credit bureaus to verify the freeze had processed. No new lines of credit could be opened without direct in-person identity verification. At noon, my phone buzzed. "Victoria," I declined the call. Ethan followed with a text. "We need to talk before you make this worse." I didn't respond. By 1:30, I was seated across from my attorney in a quiet conference room. I laid out everything: the forged power of attorney draft, the guardianship language, the transaction spreadsheet, the email exchanges. He read in silence for several minutes. "This is potential financial fraud and attempted asset control," he said finally. Hearing it stated clinically did something to me. It removed the last layer of doubt. "If they file first claiming diminished capacity, you would be forced into defensive posture," he added. "If you file first, you control the narrative." Control the narrative. I had allowed them to control the language for months. Stressed, overreacting, burned out. Now I would control the record. We drafted a formal written demand: 30 days to repay $120,000. Failure to comply would result in civil litigation for fraud and identity misrepresentation. He advised not sending it until we had full transaction documentation secured. The more evidence, the stronger the case. I left his office with a folder under my arm and clarity in my chest. When I returned home, the condo was quiet. Victoria and Ethan were out. I walked through each room slowly. The living room still held wedding magazines scattered across the coffee table. The dining table bore faint impressions from the stack of 67 pages I had slammed down the day before. In the bedroom, the closet still smelled faintly of Victoria's perfume. This had been my home. It still was. I sat at the kitchen island and opened my laptop again. Another login attempt notification appeared. Secondary access suspended. They were trying again. Within minutes, my phone began ringing. Victoria's voice came through voicemail first. "What did you do? I can't access anything." Ethan's text followed. "You're sabotaging us." My mother sent a message. "Stop escalating this, escalating." The word irritated me now. I wasn't escalating, I was locking. At 4:20 in the afternoon, Victoria returned home. She dropped her purse onto the counter. "The account says access denied," she said. "Yes," I replied. "You froze it." "Yes." "You didn't even warn us." "I didn't need to." Her face flushed. "The yacht company called. The deposit failed." "Why were you attempting another transfer?" I asked. She faltered. "It was for final confirmation." "Without telling me?" Ethan entered seconds later. "You can't just shut everything down," he said. "I can," I replied. "I am the primary account holder." "You're overreacting," he snapped. I opened the spreadsheet and rotated the laptop toward him. $120,000, I said. "Explain it." He stared at the screen but didn't answer. Victoria's voice trembled. "You promised to help." "I promised limited access," I corrected. "Weddings are expensive," she said. "Forged documents are illegal," I replied. Silence swallowed the room. Later that evening, I finalized the demand letter and sent it via certified mail and encrypted email. 30 days. No ambiguity, no emotional language. Just facts. By the time the confirmation receipts came through, I felt something settle inside me. They could scream, they could accuse, they could attempt to reframe, but the documentation existed now. Official, structured, filed. At 9 that night, I logged into my accounts one final time. All access secure, all secondary privileges revoked, multi-factor authentication required for every action. I changed one more password. Not because I feared another breach, because I wanted to. Control was not reactive. It was deliberate. Victoria knocked on my bedroom door quietly before midnight. "Are you really going to take this to court?" she asked. "If repayment isn't made, yes." She looked smaller than I remembered. "You're ruining my wedding." I met her eyes. "I didn't ruin it." She left without another word. I lay down and stared at the ceiling again. 18 months earlier, I had said yes because I believed generosity strengthened family. Now I understood something else. Generosity without boundaries invites exploitation. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought stability meant infinite supply. They mistook calm for compliance. Tomorrow, the real confrontation would begin. Not with shouting, not with accusations, with a case number. And once something becomes a case, it no longer belongs to emotion. It belongs to record. For the first time since they moved in, I felt no confusion, no hesitation, only resolve. The accounts were locked. And this time, so was the narrative. The certified mail receipt confirmed delivery at 10:17 in the morning. I watched the notification appear on my phone while sitting in my office conference room, sunlight cutting across the polished table in sharp lines. 30 days had officially begun. At 11:32, Victoria called. I let it ring. At 11:34, Ethan called. I let that ring too. By noon, my mother had left a voicemail thick with restrained panic. "Isabella, please don't do this publicly. We can talk." Publicly, as if the existence of documentation were the embarrassment, not the behavior. At 1:15, an email arrived from an unfamiliar address. Subject line, representation notice. Ethan had retained counsel. The message was concise. They disputed the characterization of fraud. They claimed verbal agreement for financial support. They suggested mediation. I forwarded the email to my attorney without comment. Within an hour, he replied, "We expected this." Of course we did. Narratives don't collapse quietly. They resist. When I returned home that evening, the condo felt different, quieter. Victoria sat at the kitchen island with red eyes and a glass of wine she hadn't touched. Ethan paced near the balcony, phone pressed to his ear. My parents were there too. The intervention had been assembled. My father stood when I walked in. "Sit down," he said. I didn't. "What do you want?" I asked. "Withdraw the letter," my mother said immediately. "We can handle this internally." Internally. 18 months of internal handling had led here. Victoria looked at me with something softer than anger. "You blindsided us," she said. "You forged my signature," I replied. Ethan ended his call and stepped forward. "There was no forgery," he said. "There was a draft." "A draft with my name signed," I corrected. He exhaled sharply. "You're framing this to look criminal." "It is criminal," I said. The word landed heavier than the previous ones. My father's jaw tightened. "You are going to destroy your sister's future." "I am protecting mine." Victoria's voice cracked. "You always do this." "Do what?" "Act like you're above us." I felt something inside me go still. "This isn't about superiority," I said quietly. "It's about ownership." Silence. Ethan broke it first. "If this goes to court, it becomes record. Employers see that. Banks see that. Everyone sees it." "Yes," I said. "And you're comfortable with that?" "Yes." He stared at me like I had become someone unfamiliar. Maybe I had. The next morning, I received a formal mediation proposal. They offered partial repayment. $35,000, in exchange for withdrawing all allegations of fraud. I read the number twice. 35,000, not even half, not even close. I called my attorney. "We decline," I said before he finished explaining the strategy. He didn't argue. He knew me well enough now. By midweek, something shifted in the household. Victoria stopped arguing. She started crying. Not performative tears, quiet ones. Ethan grew sharper, more agitated, phone calls in the hallway, doors closing harder than necessary. I overheard him one evening. "If she files, discovery will expose everything." Victoria whispered something I couldn't hear. "Expose everything." The phrase lingered. The following afternoon, I received a call from the bank's compliance officer. Several flagged transactions were now under formal review. One vendor, Emerald Coast Consulting, had no registration record in Illinois or California. Funds had been routed through an intermediary account tied to a private crypto wallet. The wallet ID matched one connected to Ethan's device logins. I thanked her calmly. After hanging up, I sat very still. Evidence was no longer circumstantial. It was technical. That evening, I placed a printed summary of the bank's findings on the dining table. Victoria saw it first. "What is that?" she asked. "Compliance review summary," I said. Ethan read it next. His face paled slightly. "You went to the bank?" he asked. "Yes. You reported me. I reported suspicious transactions." My father arrived an hour later, summoned by panic. He read the summary and went silent. "This is escalating beyond family," he said finally. "It already was," I replied. Victoria's tears came faster now. "I never meant for this to spiral," she whispered. "Spiral." The language shifted again, from control to chaos, from planning to accident. "You discussed guardianship," I reminded her. "That was Ethan's idea," she said quickly. Ethan's head snapped toward her. The fracture widened in real time. "So now you're blaming me?" he demanded. "You said it was protective," she shot back. "It was strategic," he corrected without thinking. The word hung in the air like a confession. Strategic. My father looked at Ethan differently after that. Not like a son-in-law, like a liability. 2 days later, another email arrived from Ethan's attorney. Revised settlement proposal. $70,000. Structured payments. Confidentiality clause. No admission of wrongdoing. Closer. Still incomplete. I declined again. If the amount wasn't whole, the record would be. By the end of the week, the condo felt like a pressure chamber. Victoria barely spoke. Ethan moved with restless energy. My parents oscillated between pleading and silent resentment. Saturday afternoon, Victoria asked if we could talk alone. We sat in the living room where she had once planned her dream wedding. "I didn't think you'd actually file," she admitted. "I will," I said. She looked down at her hands. "He said once we were married, everything would feel stable." He? Not we. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. "Stable doesn't come from control," I said quietly. She didn't respond. That night, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Victoria or Ethan. It was a notification from the court e-filing system. My attorney had submitted the complaint. Case number assigned. Civil action, financial fraud, and identity misrepresentation. I stared at the number for a long time. It looked clinical, neutral, unemotional, exactly what this needed to be. Minutes later, Ethan's voice carried down the hallway. "They filed." Victoria's reply was too soft to hear. Then something slammed. A door. A wall. I wasn't sure, but I knew this much. The story was no longer confined to my dining table. It existed in a system now, structured, documented, trackable. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought I feared conflict. They thought stability meant silence. They forgot something fundamental. I work in risk analysis. And once risk is quantified, it doesn't intimidate. It informs action. As I turned off the lights that night, the condo no longer felt invaded. It felt transitional. The wedding was unraveling. The narrative was shifting. And for the first time since they moved in, I was not reacting. I was leading. Tomorrow, they would wake up not as victims of my overreaction, but as defendants in a documented case. And that changes everything. The summons was served on a gray Wednesday afternoon. I wasn't home when the process server knocked, but building security called me immediately. "There's a courier asking for Victoria Morgan and Ethan Blake," the concierge said. "Legal documents." "Let them up," I replied. By the time I returned from work, the condo was thick with tension. Victoria sat frozen on the couch, the envelope open on the coffee table in front of her. Ethan stood by the window, jaw clenched, reading the complaint for what must have been the 10th time. My parents were already there. Of course they were. "This is unbelievable," my father said the moment I stepped inside. "No," I replied evenly, "it's documented." Victoria's eyes were swollen. "You actually filed," she whispered. "Yes." Ethan looked at me sharply. "You're alleging fraud." "I am alleging documented financial misuse and identity misrepresentation." "You're destroying us," he snapped. "I am protecting myself." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't understand what discovery will expose." "I do," I said. "That's the point." Silence followed. For the first time, no one accused me of overreacting. They were reading the language. Count 1, financial fraud. Count 2, identity misrepresentation. Count 3, attempted asset control through forged documentation. The words were clinical, cold, impossible to reframe as sibling misunderstanding. Victoria's hands trembled. "You could have handled this privately," she said. "I tried," I replied. 18 months of quiet tolerance, 9 months of subtle warnings, weeks of escalating access attempts. Privately had not worked. Ethan threw the complaint back onto the table. "You have no proof of intent." I walked to my desk and returned with a printed compliance summary from the bank. Crypto wallet linkage logs, third-party routing patterns, login timestamps from devices registered to Ethan. I placed them beside the complaint. "Intent will be determined," I said. He didn't respond. That night, the first visible crack appeared. Ethan's phone rang constantly. He took calls on the balcony, pacing. His tone shifted from confident to strained. Victoria stayed silent. The next morning I woke to raised voices. "You told me it was contained," Victoria hissed. "It was until she escalated," Ethan shot back. "She didn't escalate," she said quietly. "She locked what was hers." The difference in language mattered. I made coffee without acknowledging them. By noon, my attorney emailed an update. Ethan's counsel had requested expedited mediation. Now. Not 30 days. Now. Fear changes pacing. That evening, the Vineyard venue called Victoria directly. The deposit was frozen pending payment confirmation. Without immediate funds, the date would be released. Victoria stared at her phone as if it had betrayed her. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "It is," Ethan muttered. My mother arrived again. "She's heartbroken," she told me. "Is this worth it?" I didn't answer immediately. I looked at Victoria sitting on my couch, in my condo, with a complaint bearing my name on the header. "It's not about worth," I said finally. "It's about boundary." My father rubbed his temples. "This will follow the family forever." No, the documentation would. The behavior had already followed us. The next day, something shifted again. The yacht company canceled the reservation entirely. The florist withdrew due to uncertainty of payment. Bridesmaids began texting Victoria quietly, asking what was going on. Narratives spread quickly. By Friday afternoon, Ethan received a separate notice. The court had authorized preliminary document preservation. He was legally required to retain all financial communications. He read the email twice. "You're serious about this," he said. "I was serious 18 months ago," I replied. That night, Victoria knocked on my bedroom door. She didn't come in. She stood in the hallway, smaller than I had ever seen her. "I didn't think you'd actually choose court over me," she said. "I didn't think you'd choose control over me," I answered. Her eyes filled. "It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that." She didn't argue. She went back to the master bedroom and closed the door softly. Saturday morning, Ethan packed a suitcase. Not dramatically, not angrily, quietly. Victoria watched from the doorway. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To stay with a friend," he said, "until this stabilizes." Stabilizes. The word tasted bitter now. He didn't look at me as he left. The door clicked shut. Silence flooded the condo. Victoria stood there for a long time. Then she sat down at the dining table where the 67 pages had once been spread. "This isn't what I wanted," she said quietly. I didn't respond, because what she wanted had never been clearly defined. Status, security, admiration, those are fragile foundations. By Monday, Ethan's attorney submitted a revised proposal. Full repayment over structured installments. No confidentiality clause. No demand to withdraw fraud language. That was new. My attorney called me. "They're feeling pressure," he said. "I know," I replied. Victoria approached me later that evening. "He's talking about separating finances," she said. "You should," I answered. She looked startled. "You're not gloating," she said. "I'm not winning," I replied. "I'm correcting." That night, I walked into the master bedroom fully. No hesitation. I opened the closet. The gown still hung there. White, untouched. The wedding binder sat on the dresser. I closed it gently. This was no longer about a ceremony. It was about consequence. When I returned to the living room, Victoria was staring at the skyline. "He said if the wedding happened, everything would feel stable," she murmured. "And did it?" I asked. She didn't answer, because it hadn't happened. And stability built on someone else's account was never stability. It was dependence. Later that week, mediation was scheduled. Formal, documented, court-monitored. As I reviewed the updated repayment proposal, I realized something quietly powerful. They no longer argued that I was overreacting. They no longer suggested therapy. They no longer framed me as unstable. The narrative had shifted. Not because I shouted louder, but because I documented better. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought I feared conflict. They thought stability meant silence. Now they understood something else. Stability can mean evidence, and once evidence enters a courtroom, it doesn't disappear under emotion. It stands. The condo felt different that night. Not fractured. Transitional. Ethan was gone. Victoria was quiet. My parents called less frequently. The wedding date approached without confirmation. and I stood in the center of my living room looking at the city lights flickering beyond the glass. 18 months ago, I said yes because I believed family meant unconditional support. Now I understood something stronger. Support without boundary is surrender, and surrender, once recognized, must be reversed. The case was active, the narrative was public, the illusion was collapsing. And for the first time since they moved in, I wasn't waiting for the next transfer alert. I was waiting for the next court notice. Because this time the future wasn't being drafted in someone else's drawer. It was being filed under my name. And that made all the difference. 30 days began to feel shorter once the case number existed. The week after the complaint was filed, the condo felt hollow in a way it hadn't before. Ethan's suitcase was gone. His cologne no longer lingered in the hallway. The master bedroom door stayed half open now, not shut. Victoria moved through the space quietly, as if every step had weight. I returned to my routines with precision: work, gym, evening calls with my attorney, weekly transaction monitoring. The wedding website quietly disappeared 3 days after the summons was served. I noticed because I had bookmarked it months ago. Now the link returned a blank page. At 9 on Monday morning, I reviewed the certified mail confirmation for the demand letter again. Delivered, signed, received. There would be no argument that they hadn't known. By midweek, Ethan's attorney sent a formal response to the complaint. They denied intent. They denied forgery. They asserted verbal agreement for financial contribution. They suggested mediation to avoid irreparable family harm. Family harm. The phrasing felt calculated. I forwarded the response to my attorney. He replied within the hour. They are posturing. Discovery will be uncomfortable for them. Uncomfortable was an understatement. Discovery meant subpoenaed communications, device logs, bank routing trails, storage unit contents. I wasn't afraid of discovery. I had nothing to hide. On Wednesday evening, my parents invited me to dinner at their house in Naperville. I almost declined, but I knew avoidance would be interpreted as guilt. The dining room felt smaller than I remembered. My mother placed roasted chicken on the table as if nothing had shifted. My father had printed copies of the court filing beside his plate. "You've made this public," he said before the food cooled. "I made it formal," I corrected. Victoria sat across from me, eyes rimmed red but steady. My mother reached for her hand. "She's already lost the venue," she said. "The florist. Half the guests know something is wrong." "The vendors lost deposits too," I said. "They deserve payment." "This could have been settled privately," my father repeated. "It wasn't," I said. He stared at the paperwork. "You're calling your sister fraudulent. I'm calling the transactions fraudulent." Silence stretched across the table. My mother finally spoke. "Victoria told us you agreed to support the wedding financially." "She told you," I replied. "Did you ask me?" My father's jaw tightened. "We trusted her." There it was. The hierarchy made visible. Trust had never flowed evenly. "You trusted her," I said quietly. "You expected me to absorb." Victoria looked up sharply. "That's not fair." "Neither was forging my name," I replied. The word forgery hung between us again. My father rubbed his temples. "She was overwhelmed." "Overwhelmed people don't draft guardianship petitions," I said. Victoria's fork clattered against her plate. "That was precaution," she whispered. "Against what?" I asked. My mother's eyes filled. "You've seemed distant for months," she said. "You barely sleep. You work constantly." "So that justifies control?" I asked. No one answered. On Friday morning, my attorney called. Ethan's counsel had requested emergency mediation. "Not next month, next week." "They're concerned about criminal exposure," my attorney said. Criminal. The word shifted the room inside my chest. I hadn't filed criminal charges. But bank compliance reports had language that could trigger referral. The pressure was no longer abstract. That afternoon, I received another call from the bank. The internal review had identified 3 transfers routed through an intermediary account tied to a crypto exchange wallet registered under Ethan's email. The timestamps aligned with his login attempts. I thanked the compliance officer. I asked for written confirmation. By evening, the email arrived. Official, structured, traceable. When I walked into the condo that night, Victoria was sitting at the kitchen island staring at her phone. "He moved out for good," she said quietly. I didn't ask who. I already knew. "He said this isn't survivable," she added. I placed my bag on the counter. "Is it?" I asked. She looked at me, tears welling but controlled. "He said if we had just secured everything before you noticed, none of this would have happened." Secured everything. The phrase confirmed more than she realized. "So he knew," I said. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Saturday afternoon, I received a voicemail from Ethan directly, not his lawyer, him. "We can fix this," he said. "We can reach an agreement. It doesn't have to destroy anyone." Destroy. The vocabulary always implied I was the aggressor, as if documentation were violence. I did not return the call. Instead, I printed the bank's compliance summary and added it to the case file. By Sunday evening, Victoria packed 2 suitcases, not for a honeymoon, for relocation. She was moving into a smaller apartment in Lincoln Park. My parents helped her carry boxes. I stood in the doorway and watched quietly. "You're happy about this," my mother accused softly. "No," I said. "I'm resolved." Victoria paused before leaving. "Is there any way to stop this?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Repay what was taken." She hesitated. "It's not all still there." "I know." She left without another word. The condo felt cavernous after the door closed. 18 months of noise evaporated into stillness. I walked through each room slowly. The living room was empty of bridal magazines. The master bedroom closet held only my clothes again. The kitchen counters were clear. I sat at the dining table where the 67 pages had once been spread. 30 days. That was the window. By Tuesday, mediation was confirmed. Formal, recorded, structured. Ethan's counsel sent a revised proposal. $80,000. Structured payments over 2 years. No admission of wrongdoing. Closer. Still incomplete. I called my attorney. "We proceed," I said. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Yes." Because this was no longer about money alone. It was about precedent. On Thursday evening, my father called. "Your sister is in pieces," he said. "She should be," I replied. "That's cruel." "No," I said quietly. "It's consequence." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You've changed," he said. "No," I answered. "I've stopped absorbing." When I hung up, I felt no guilt, only clarity. 30 days were moving quickly. The illusion of a wedding had collapsed. The illusion of unlimited access had collapsed with it. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought I feared conflict. They thought stability meant endless tolerance. Now they were learning something else. Stability can also mean endurance, and endurance, when paired with documentation, does not break under pressure. It waits. The mediation date approached. The case file thickened, and for the first time since this began, I wasn't bracing for impact. I was watching the structure they built collapse under its own weight. 30 days. And this time, I was not the one running out of options. Mediation was scheduled for 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning. I arrived 10 minutes early, folder in hand, posture steady. The conference room was neutral, long table, glass walls, muted carpeting designed to absorb conflict. Ethan was already there with his attorney. He looked thinner, less polished. The confidence he once carried like a tailored suit now hung loosely around him. Victoria arrived a few minutes later with separate counsel. That detail mattered, separate. She didn't sit beside him. She chose a chair across from me. The mediator, a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper voice, began by outlining the structure. This is a civil dispute regarding alleged financial fraud and identity misrepresentation, she said calmly. We are here to determine whether settlement is possible before litigation proceeds. The words fraud and misrepresentation sat on the table like visible objects. No one flinched. We began with numbers: $120,000, total documented withdrawals over 18 months. Ethan's attorney argued verbal consent. He referenced shared living arrangements. He suggested familial understanding. My attorney slid the transaction spreadsheet across the table, color-coded, time-stamped, highlighted. Consent does not extend to forged signatures, he said quietly. Victoria stared at the table. Ethan shifted in his chair. The mediator turned to him. Were you aware of the draft power of attorney? She asked. It was precautionary, he said. Against what? She asked evenly. He hesitated. Financial instability. The mediator looked at me. Has any court or physician determined financial instability? No, I replied. Victoria's attorney spoke next. My client acknowledges poor judgment but denies malicious intent. Poor judgment, not fraud. The language softened deliberately. My attorney responded without raising his voice. Intent will be evaluated through discovery. We are here to discuss repayment. The room went quiet again. Ethan's attorney proposed $80,000 structured over 24 months. No admission of wrongdoing, mutual non-disparagement, confidentiality. I didn't react immediately. I looked at Victoria. She wouldn't meet my eyes. That does not cover the full amount, my attorney said. Ethan's attorney leaned forward. My client's liquidity is limited. Liquidity was sufficient for yacht deposits, my attorney replied. The mediator raised a hand. Let's focus. We broke into separate caucuses. In my private room, my attorney closed the door and exhaled slowly. They are worried about criminal referral, he said. Bank compliance reports are serious. I nodded. I want full acknowledgement in writing, I said. Not emotional apology, legal acknowledgement. He studied me. You're certain you want the record? Yes. This was not about vengeance. It was about permanence. In the other room, voices rose faintly. I recognized Ethan's tone. Defensive, tight. An hour later, we reconvened. Ethan avoided looking at Victoria. The mediator spoke carefully. There appears to be internal disagreement regarding strategy. Internal disagreement. That was an understatement. Victoria spoke for the first time. I didn't think it would go this far, she said quietly. It went far when you signed it, I replied. The mediator redirected. Are you prepared to acknowledge unauthorized access to funds? Ethan's attorney stiffened. My client does not concede fraud. Victoria's attorney looked at her. She swallowed. I authorized transactions beyond agreed limits, she said slowly. I signed documents without Isabella's consent. The air shifted. Ethan looked at her sharply. You're throwing me under the bus? He snapped. I'm telling the truth, she said. That was the first time she had used that phrase. Truth. The mediator leaned forward. Is there a path to structured repayment with acknowledgement of unauthorized access? Silence stretched. Finally, Ethan's attorney spoke. My client will consider structured restitution without admission of criminal liability. Not criminal, but restitution. The language had shifted again. The mediator drafted a framework, full repayment, structured over 3 years, automatic monthly transfers, written acknowledgement of unauthorized financial use, no confidentiality clause preventing factual disclosure. The acknowledgement mattered most. Ethan's face hardened. This will follow me, he said. Yes, I replied quietly, because actions do. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I was scared, she whispered. Of what? I asked. Of not having enough, she said. Enough status, enough security, enough admiration. Fear had driven her, but fear does not erase consequence. After 5 hours, the outline was drafted, not signed yet, but real. As we stood to leave, Ethan spoke directly to me for the first time that day. "You could have handled this privately," he said. I met his gaze. "You could have asked." He didn't respond. Victoria lingered as the others exited. "I never thought you'd choose court," she said softly. "I never thought you'd choose control," I answered. She looked at me differently then, not as the stable one, not as the financial safety net, but as an equal. The mediator scheduled final review for the following week. If signed, litigation would pause pending compliance. If not, discovery would proceed. On the drive home, Chicago traffic crawled under a gray sky. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grounded. The condo greeted me with silence. No wedding magazines, no vendor calls, no champagne glasses left on the counter. I walked into the master bedroom and opened the closet. Only my clothes remained. I ran my fingers along the hangers slowly. Control did not feel explosive, it felt steady. Later that evening, my father called. "Victoria says you're negotiating," he said cautiously. "Yes." "Are you willing to let this end?" "It will end when it's repaid." He sighed. "You've become very hard." "No," I said. "I've become clear." He didn't argue. For the first time in months, he didn't defend her. That night, I reviewed the mediation outline again. Full amount. Structured. Acknowledgement. The case number still existed. The complaint still stood. Nothing had been erased. But the trajectory had changed. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought I feared conflict. They thought stability meant silence. Now they were learning something else. Stability can mean endurance. And endurance, when paired with evidence, reshapes power quietly. The final documents would be drafted within days. And this time, no one would be signing anything in my name without consent. The narrative had shifted. Not because I shouted louder, but because I documented better. And documentation, once formalized, does not disappear. It becomes record. That was what they feared now, not my anger, my record. The storage unit disclosure came through on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. My attorney forwarded the email with a single line. They responded. Attached was a scanned inventory list from Harbor Lock Storage. Unit registered under Ethan Blake. Access logs included dates and times that matched several large withdrawals from my account. I opened the attachment slowly. Box 1, Financial Summaries. Box 2, Draft Legal Documents. Box 3, Digital Backup Drives. Box 4, Printed Email Correspondence. My name appeared repeatedly in the item descriptions. Not casually, organized, categorized, prepared. I felt something cold settle in my chest. This was not chaotic behavior. It was structured. I called my attorney immediately. "They kept physical copies," I said. "Yes," he replied. "That strengthens intent." Intent! The word had hovered abstractly until now. Now it had weight. Later that day, we received scanned images of several of the documents stored in the unit. Draft co-ownership application for my condo, power of attorney draft, guardianship petition outline, email printouts between Ethan and a private legal consultant discussing risk mitigation if primary asset holder becomes resistant. Resistant. That was the language. Not concerned, not protective. Resistant. In one email, Ethan wrote, "Once consolidation occurs post-wedding, exposure decreases. Post-wedding, consolidation, exposure." The words blurred together for a moment before sharpening into clarity. I closed my office door and leaned back in my chair. 18 months of slow erosion, months of subtle reframing, and here it was, printed, boxed, stored. When I returned home that evening, Victoria was sitting at the dining table. The mediation outline sat in front of her. She looked smaller than she had during the engagement celebration. "You've seen it," she said. "Yes." Her eyes filled. "I didn't know about the storage unit." I studied her. "Your signature is on the drafts." "I thought they were precautionary," she whispered. "Precaution against what?" I asked. She hesitated. "He said if you panicked, we needed leverage." Leverage. The word landed with quiet violence. So, I was a risk to be managed, I said. No, she said quickly. You were stressed. There is a difference between stress and instability, I replied. She looked at the floor. I didn't think it would go that far. But it had. The next morning, Ethan's attorney requested an urgent conference call. My attorney and I joined from his office. Ethan's voice was tighter than usual. You're mischaracterizing stored documents, he said. They were strategic planning materials. For what? My attorney asked. Asset protection, Ethan replied. For whom? My attorney pressed. Silence. The call ended without resolution. An hour later, the mediator contacted us. Given the new evidence, she suggested accelerating settlement finalization. Discovery would expose everything, publicly, formally, with subpoenas. The pressure had shifted. By Friday afternoon, a revised settlement draft arrived. Full repayment acknowledged. Structured over 36 months. Automatic wage assignment clause. Written acknowledgement of unauthorized financial activity. Not fraud, but unauthorized activity. It was closer. I sat alone in my living room and read every line carefully. The acknowledgement paragraph stood out. Respondents acknowledged that funds were accessed and utilized beyond the scope of originally agreed permissions. It wasn't poetic, it was factual. That mattered. Victoria knocked softly before entering. I'm signing, she said quietly. You understand what that means? I asked. Yes. Ethan, she swallowed. He doesn't want to. Will he? She nodded slowly. He doesn't have a choice. Choice. The word felt ironic. For 18 months, I had been the one without it. Now the balance had shifted. That evening, my parents came over. Not angry this time, worried. My father sat heavily in the armchair. This will follow, Victoria, he said. So will the behavior, I replied. My mother's voice trembled. Is there no way to soften the language? It is already softened, I said. They looked at the acknowledgement paragraph. No admission of criminal fraud, no public statement, just documented unauthorized access. My father exhaled slowly. You're firm, he said. Yes. Not cruel? He added after a moment. No. The difference mattered. Sunday afternoon, final mediation reconvened to execute the agreement. The room felt smaller than before, less combative, more resigned. Ethan signed last. His signature looked hurried. Victoria signed slowly, deliberately. When the final page was notarized, the mediator closed the folder. This resolves the civil dispute pending compliance, she said. Not erased, resolved pending compliance. That nuance stayed with me. As we stood, Ethan spoke quietly. You didn't have to make it this formal. Yes, I said. I did. He didn't argue. Outside the building, rain tapped against the pavement. Victoria paused beside me. I didn't think you'd choose documentation over me, she said. I chose myself, I replied. There was no anger in my voice, only clarity. She nodded slowly. I'm starting to understand that. We walked to our separate cars. When I arrived home, the condo felt different. Not heavy, not tense, transitional. The master bedroom no longer felt occupied by ghosts of bridal planning. The dining table no longer carried stacks of evidence. The documents now existed in a structured legal file. Official, signed, enforceable. That night, I opened my laptop and reviewed the automatic transfer schedule. The first payment would arrive in 30 days, small compared to the total, but structured, trackable, accountable. I sat in silence for a long time. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought stability meant silence. They thought documentation was unnecessary between family. Now documentation was the only thing holding the structure upright. And it was enough. The illusion of consolidation had collapsed. The illusion of leverage had collapsed with it. What remained was record, and record does not forget. As I turned off the lights and walked toward the bedroom, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not triumph, not vindication, control, quiet, complete. And this time, it wasn't being drafted in someone else's storage unit. It was filed under my name, exactly where it belonged. 2 weeks after the settlement was signed, my parents asked me to come to dinner again. "Just us," my mother said on the phone. "No lawyers. No documents." I almost declined, but avoidance had never been my strategy. Their house in Naperville looked the same as it always had. White siding, trimmed hedges. The porch light flickering slightly the way it had since I was in high school. Some things don't change. Others collapse quietly inside. When I walked in, the air felt heavier than the last time. No printed court filings this time. No raised voices. Just silence waiting to be filled. My father gestured toward the dining table. "Sit," he said. I did. Victoria was already there, not glowing, not triumphant, just present. My mother placed salad bowls on the table without meeting my eyes. We began eating before anyone spoke. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "This has gone further than it ever should have," he said. "It went exactly as far as it was taken," I replied. He looked at me carefully. "You filed a lawsuit against your sister." "Yes." "You involved banks." "Yes." "You forced mediation." "Yes." Each answer landed cleanly. No hesitation, no apology. My mother's voice trembled slightly. "Victoria has been under so much pressure." "From what?" I asked. "The wedding, expectations, Ethan's instability." "None of that justifies forged signatures," I said calmly. Victoria's fork paused mid-air. "I signed it," she said quietly. My father looked at her sharply. "You don't have to keep saying that." "I do," she replied. Silence stretched. This was new. Accountability spoken without prompting. My mother wiped her hands on a napkin. "You've always been stronger," she said, looking at me. The word felt familiar. Stronger, meaning I could handle more. Meaning I could absorb more. Meaning I should have. "I am not stronger," I said. "I just stopped tolerating." My father leaned back in his chair. "You could have handled it privately." I tried. "No, you documented," he corrected. "Yes," I said. There it was. The underlying discomfort. Documentation removes ambiguity. Ambiguity protects hierarchy. Without ambiguity, favoritism becomes visible. "You embarrassed the family," my mother whispered. "I protected myself," I replied. Victoria looked at me directly for the first time that evening. "I thought you would always absorb it," she admitted. Absorb. The word settled between us. "I did," I said, "until I didn't." My father's jaw tightened. "She was scared," he said. "Of what?" I asked. "Of losing stability." "Stability built on someone else's account isn't stability," I said. Victoria's eyes filled but didn't spill. "I didn't think you would actually file," she said again. "That's the problem," I replied. No one expected consequence. They expected negotiation, emotion, compromise, not record. My mother finally spoke the sentence that clarified everything. "We trusted her." She looked at Victoria, then at me. "And we assumed you would understand." Understand. Translate, accept. Translate, forgive before accountability. "You trusted her," I said quietly. "You never verified with me." My father didn't argue. For the first time in months, he didn't defend. He just looked tired. Victoria exhaled slowly. "I told them you agreed," she admitted. "I didn't," I said. "I know that now," she whispered. The shift in tone was subtle, but undeniable. Not justification, recognition. Dinner ended without raised voices, without reconciliation, but without denial. As I stood to leave, my father asked the question he had been holding all night. "Is there any path back from this?" I paused at the doorway. "There was," I said, "before the forged signature." He flinched slightly. The word still carried weight. "I don't hate you," I added quietly, "but I won't erase what happened." Victoria stepped forward. "I don't expect you to," she said. That was new. Expectation had finally changed. On the drive back to Chicago, the highway lights blurred slightly through the windshield. Not from tears, from exhaustion. The house in Naperville would always feel like childhood, but adulthood requires different boundaries. When I walked into my condo, the silence felt earned. No wedding binders, no raised voices, no hidden folders. I sat at the kitchen island and replayed the evening. My parents hadn't apologized, but they had stopped defending. That was movement, small, but real. The next morning I received confirmation that the first structured repayment transfer was scheduled. 30 days, automatic, enforceable. I stared at the notification for a long moment. Not because of the amount, because of the shift. Money was no longer flowing out unmonitored. It was flowing back with documentation attached. Later that week, my mother called again, her voice softer. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yes." "You don't seem angry." "I'm not." "You seem distant." "I'm clear." There was a long pause. "Your father says you handled this stronger than we did," she said. Stronger. The word returned, but it felt different now, not obligation, recognition. "That's not strength," I replied. "That's boundary." She didn't argue. When I hung up, I felt something subtle loosen. Not reconciliation, but recalibration. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought stability meant silence. They thought documentation was cruelty. Now they were beginning to understand something else. Stability can mean refusal, and refusal when grounded in evidence is not aggression, it is alignment. That evening I stood in my bedroom and looked around slowly. Everything in its place. No shared drawers, no hidden drafts, no quiet erasure. For 18 months I had mistaken tolerance for love. Now I understood the difference. Love without boundary invites exploitation. Boundary without apology invites respect. The family dynamic had shifted. Not healed, shifted. And sometimes shift is the only honest beginning. I turned off the light and closed the door, not shutting anyone out, just securing what was mine. And this time, no one questioned that right. The first repayment installment was scheduled for the end of the month. It felt strange watching a transfer come toward me instead of away. Not because of the amount, because of what it represented. Acknowledgement. The settlement had paused the civil litigation, but the complaint remained active pending compliance. If payment stopped, the case resumed. Structure. For the first time in nearly 2 years, the structure protected me. 3 days before the first transfer, my attorney called. "There's an issue," he said. I sat down slowly. "What kind of issue?" "Ethan is attempting to separate his liability from Victoria's." Of course he was. "He wants to amend the agreement," my attorney continued, "claiming unequal benefit from the funds." I almost laughed. Crypto transfers traced to his wallet, storage unit under his name, emails referencing consolidation strategy, unequal benefit. "He signed," I said. "Yes, but he's trying to limit exposure." Exposure. The word again. "Does he have grounds?" I asked. "Not strong ones," my attorney replied, "but he may push for revision to reduce personal repayment obligation." I closed my eyes for a moment. Of course. The pattern remained consistent. When pressure intensified, Ethan recalibrated to protect himself. That evening, I received a forwarded email chain. Ethan's counsel had formally requested modification of the repayment structure. They claimed Victoria authorized most expenditures. They attempted to shift primary responsibility onto her. I read the email twice. Then I opened the compliance report again. Crypto wallet linkage, device login timestamps, his email address tied to third-party routing, his notes referencing post-wedding consolidation. The evidence was not ambiguous. The next morning, Victoria called. "I just got the amendment notice," she said quietly. "He's shifting liability," I replied. "I know." Her voice sounded thinner than usual. "He said he didn't know how much was taken." "That's not true." Silence. I didn't realize he was moving funds into his own wallets, she admitted. The admission landed like a final crack in glass. So this wasn't shared equally, I said. No. That one word changed the dynamic completely. It wasn't just manipulation, it was layered manipulation. I met with my attorney that afternoon. We can oppose modification, he said, or we can allow proportional liability restructuring based on evidence. Which is stronger? I asked. Opposition preserves full joint liability, he replied, but restructuring could isolate his exposure and increase compliance pressure. Pressure, that was the currency now. What do you recommend? I asked. He paused. Based on the crypto trace and storage unit evidence, isolating his liability may force faster resolution. I nodded slowly. Then isolate it. That evening, Ethan showed up at the condo without warning. Victoria wasn't there. He stood in the doorway looking more tired than I had ever seen him. "You're enjoying this?" he said. "No," I replied. "You split us," he added. "You split yourself," I said calmly. He stepped inside without waiting for permission. "I never intended for this to spiral," he said. "You drafted guardianship language," I replied. "That was contingency planning. For controlling my assets. For stabilizing chaos." Chaos. The word felt hollow now. "You gambled wedding funds on crypto," I said evenly. His jaw tightened. "It was temporary liquidity strategy." "It was leverage," I corrected. Silence. He looked around the condo as if measuring what he had nearly secured. "You could drop the complaint," he said finally. "I won't. You'll ruin Victoria, too." I didn't draft her signature. That stopped him. He exhaled slowly. "I can't carry the full repayment," he admitted, the first honest sentence he had spoken. "Then you shouldn't have moved the funds," I replied. He left without another word. The next morning, my attorney filed opposition to his amendment. The motion included crypto wallet trace analysis, email excerpts referencing consolidation, storage unit inventory logs. The language was precise, measured, clinical. Ethan's liability would remain documented. By the end of the week, something shifted again. Victoria called late one evening. "He's leaving," she said quietly. "For good." I didn't ask for details. "He said the legal exposure is too high," she added. Exposure. There it was again. "He said he didn't sign up for criminal risk." "I never filed criminal charges," I replied. "But the bank could refer," she said. "Yes." Silence stretched. "I thought if the wedding happened, everything would stabilize," she whispered. Stabilize. The illusion had always been tied to optics. Once married, once consolidated, once publicly secure. But none of that erased documentation. The first repayment installment arrived 2 days later. Not large, but automatic, scheduled, confirmed. Victoria texted me afterward. I saw it process. No apology, just confirmation. It was enough. Ethan sent one final email through counsel. He would comply with structured liability pending court ruling on amendment. Translation: he had no leverage left. The narrative had collapsed, not dramatically, gradually, under evidence. That night, I walked through the condo slowly. The air felt different. No tension, no raised voices, no hidden drafts. Victoria had moved into a smaller apartment in Lincoln Park. Ethan was gone entirely. The wedding date passed quietly without ceremony. No announcement, no public explanation, just absence. I sat at the dining table and opened the settlement agreement again. The acknowledgement paragraph remained intact. Unauthorized access, structured restitution, automatic compliance triggers. It wasn't poetic. It was powerful. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought stability meant silence. They thought documentation could be softened through emotion. Now they understood something else. Documentation does not bend. It accumulates. And once it accumulates, it reshapes power. The case wasn't over. Payments would continue for years. But the illusion of consolidation had ended. The illusion of leverage had ended with it. What remained was record. And record, once formalized, does not disappear. It endures. That was the real shift. Not revenge, not destruction, endurance. And endurance, backed by evidence, is impossible to intimidate. For the first time in months, I slept without checking my phone for transfer alerts. Because now, if a transfer occurred, it would be coming back, and this time it would be on my terms. 6 months passed faster than I expected, not because things were easy, because they were structured. The automatic repayments arrived on schedule, not large enough to erase what happened, but steady enough to confirm compliance. The condo felt different without constant tension humming beneath every conversation. I rearranged the living room furniture the first weekend Victoria officially moved out. Not dramatically, just enough to reclaim the space. The master bedroom closet was entirely mine again. No bridal gowns, no silk garment bags, just clean lines and quiet. Work stabilized, too. I accepted a promotion to senior risk consultant. The irony didn't escape me. Risk assessment had never felt more personal. One afternoon, I received a message from the bank's compliance officer. The internal review was complete. 3 transactions remained under regulatory monitoring. No criminal referral had been initiated. For now. The phrase lingered. For now. That meant exposure still existed. Documentation remained archived. Permanent. That mattered. Victoria called occasionally. Short conversations. Surface level. How are you? Fine. Work good? Yes. We avoided discussing the case. Avoided discussing Ethan. Avoided discussing the wedding date that had quietly passed without ceremony. One evening she asked if she could stop by. I hesitated briefly, then said yes. She arrived without the polished confidence she once carried. No designer handbag, no elaborate makeup, just jeans and a sweater. She looked tired. Smaller. We sat at the kitchen island where so many confrontations had unfolded months earlier. I moved into a 1-bedroom, she said quietly. In Lincoln Park. That's good, I replied. She nodded. It's different. Different meant modest. Different meant no audience. Different meant no consolidation strategy. I'm working contract events planning now, she added. The irony was subtle but undeniable. Weddings for other people. No comment felt appropriate, so I didn't make one. After a moment, she looked at me directly. I didn't realize how much of it he controlled, she said. How much of what? I asked. The narrative, the money, the planning. I didn't interrupt. He told me once we were legally merged, everything would stabilize. Merged. Stabilize. The vocabulary had always been transactional. You believed him, I said. Yes. And now, she exhaled slowly, now I'm rebuilding. The word felt honest. Rebuilding, not blaming, not defending, just rebuilding. The first time she had said anything that wasn't reactive. 2 weeks later, another structured repayment arrived. The notifications no longer triggered adrenaline. They felt routine. Evidence converted into scheduled restoration. One afternoon at work, a colleague mentioned her sister had drained her retirement account through a joint login arrangement. She trusted her, my colleague said. I listened quietly. Trust. The word still carried weight. That evening I searched for local financial literacy workshops. I signed up for one that focused on preventing financial manipulation within family systems. Sitting in that small classroom with women in their 50s and 60s sharing stories of co-signed loans gone wrong, hidden gambling debts, and adult children siphoning funds, something shifted. I wasn't unique. I wasn't dramatic. I was part of a pattern, and patterns require boundaries. I volunteered to speak at the next session. Not about revenge, about documentation, about risk, about not equating love with unlimited access. The response surprised me. Afterward, 3 women approached me privately. One said her son had requested secondary access to her brokerage account. Another said her sister had temporarily borrowed from her savings. The language was always soft, temporary, precautionary, exploratory. The words mask intention, documentation reveals it. Victoria texted me later that night. I heard you're doing workshops. Yes. For women who've been manipulated? Yes. There was a long pause before her next message. I think I need one. I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. You're welcome to attend. No sarcasm, no bitterness, just structure. She didn't come to the first one, but she came to the second. She sat in the back, listened, took notes, didn't speak. Afterward, she approached me quietly. I didn't realize how textbook it was, she said. What was? I asked. Isolating the primary asset holder, framing them as unstable, expanding access incrementally. She had recognized the pattern. Recognition is the first form of accountability. The third month of repayments passed without incident. Then the fourth. Ethan had not contacted me directly since the amendment motion was denied. His payments processed automatically through wage assignment. Structured, enforced. Not emotional. Victoria mentioned once that he was struggling financially. I didn't respond. Consequence does not require commentary. 6 months after the settlement, I signed papers for a townhouse in Evanston. 3 bedrooms, sunlit kitchen, mortgage solely in my name. The day I received the keys, I stood in the empty living room and listened to the quiet. Not the silence of absence, the quiet of control. Victoria called that evening. You bought it, she said. Yes. I'm proud of you. The sentence surprised me. It felt sincere. Thank you, I replied. Not defensive, not distant. Just thank you. She hesitated before speaking again. I'm sorry, she said. Not elaborate, not theatrical. Just sorry. For signing it, for not asking, for assuming. I didn't rush to absolve her. I let the words exist. I won't reopen accounts, I said. I know. I won't co-sign anything. I know. If we rebuild anything, it won't include money. She nodded slowly. I understand. That was enough. When I moved into the townhouse, I carried 1 box labeled case file. Inside were printed copies of the 67 pages, the mediation agreement, the compliance summaries, the storage unit inventory. I placed it in the top shelf of a locked cabinet, not as a reminder of betrayal, as a reminder of boundary. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought stability meant silence. They thought documentation could be softened by guilt. Now they understood something else. Stability means self-protection. Documentation means permanence. Boundary means survival. As I stood in my new kitchen months later, sunlight filtering through large windows, I felt something settle deeply. Not revenge, not vindication, ownership. The accounts were secure. The house was mine. The narrative was documented. And this time, nothing required consolidation to feel stable. Stability was internal, protected, locked, on purpose. The first morning in my townhouse felt unfamiliar in the best way. No shared keys, no raised voices drifting from another room, no quiet calculations happening behind my back. Just sunlight stretching across hardwood floors and the low hum of my own coffee maker. I stood in the kitchen barefoot, holding a mug in both hands, and listened to the silence. It wasn't empty, it was earned. 6 months earlier, I had been sitting at a mediation table across from my sister and her fiancé, arguing over unauthorized withdrawals and forged drafts. Now I was standing in a home purchased entirely under my name, no secondary access, no co-ownership clauses, no contingency planning against my own stability. Owner, Isabella Morgan. That line on the closing document had felt almost radical. I spent the first week arranging the space deliberately. The office went near the front window where afternoon light was strongest. The filing cabinet sat against the far wall, locked. Inside it, on the top shelf, was the case file. 67 pages of transaction history, compliance summaries, settlement agreement. I didn't open it. I just knew it was there. Victoria had not visited yet. We spoke occasionally by phone, short conversations, measured. She asked about the house once. "How does it feel?" she said. "Stable," I answered. There was a pause. "I'm glad," she said quietly. I wasn't sure if she meant it for me or for herself. The repayment installments continued automatically, small notifications that no longer carried emotional charge. They arrived, they processed, they archived. Structure had replaced chaos. One evening, as I unpacked the last box in my office, my phone buzzed. Victoria. "I'm outside," she said. I hadn't told her my exact address, but I had mentioned the street. She must have looked up the listing. I hesitated only a second before saying, "Come up." She stood on my porch without the polished confidence she once wore like armor. No designer coat, no oversized sunglasses, just jeans, boots, and a nervous smile. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi." I stepped aside and let her in. She walked slowly through the living room, taking in the clean lines and uncluttered surfaces. "It's beautiful," she said. "Thank you." She stopped near the kitchen island and ran her fingers lightly along the countertop. "No wedding binders," she said with a faint smile. "No," I replied. The air between us wasn't hostile. It wasn't warm either. It was cautious. We sat across from each other. No audience, no lawyers, no parents, just sisters. "I ended it," she said quietly. "With Ethan?" She nodded. "It wasn't just the case," she added. "It was everything." I didn't ask her to elaborate. She did anyway. "He admitted he moved more money than he told me," she said. "He said once we were married, it wouldn't matter." Wouldn't matter. The words felt absurd now. "It mattered," I said. "Yes," she whispered. She looked around again. "You seem different." "Different how?" "Calm," she said, "but not the old calm." The old calm had been tolerance. This calm was boundary. "I'm not absorbing anymore," I said. She nodded slowly. "I used to think you were cold," she admitted. "And now? Now I think you were just disciplined." The acknowledgement was quiet but genuine. We sat in silence for a moment. "I signed the final repayment addendum," she said, "even the clause about automatic enforcement." "I know," I replied. "I didn't fight it." "That's good." She hesitated. "I thought if I pushed hard enough you'd bend," she said. I didn't respond immediately. "I always did," she added. That was the truth neither of us had said aloud before. "Yes," I said. "And now?" "Now I won't." She looked at me directly. "I'm not asking you to." The shift was subtle but unmistakable. No request for softened terms, no request for account access, no request for withdrawal of documentation, just presence. After a while, she asked, "Can we rebuild?" The question wasn't dramatic. It wasn't desperate. It was measured. "We can rebuild a relationship," I said, "but not a financial one." She nodded immediately. "I don't want access," she said. "I want accountability." The word surprised me. Accountability. "I'm learning," she continued. "I've been attending those workshops." I raised an eyebrow. "Not as a speaker," she added quickly. "As a listener." "That's good." She gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. "It's humbling." "Yes," I said. Humility had been missing for a long time. She looked around the room again. "You bought this alone," she said. "Yes." "No co-signers." "No." "No shared access." "No." She nodded slowly. "That used to intimidate me," she said. "Why?" "Because it meant you didn't need anyone." I considered that. "I don't need control," I said. "I need respect." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't respect the boundary," she admitted. "No," I agreed. We didn't argue, we didn't dramatize, we just named it. The sun began to set through the front windows, casting long shadows across the floor. "I'm moving into a smaller apartment permanently," she said. "No more short-term plans." "That's good." "I'm rebuilding my credit too," she added. "That's smart." She smiled faintly. "You sound like a consultant." "I am," I replied. We both laughed softly. It was the first shared laugh in months. When she stood to leave, she hesitated near the door. "I'm sorry," she said again. This time it sounded different. Not like a plea, like a recognition. "I know," I said. She stepped onto the porch and turned back. "You didn't ruin my wedding," she said. "No," I replied. "I did." She didn't wait for reassurance. She didn't ask for absolution. She just nodded and walked down the steps. I closed the door gently and leaned back against it. The house was quiet again. But it wasn't tense. It wasn't fragile. It was steady. I walked to the office and opened the filing cabinet. I looked at the labeled box on the top shelf. Case file. I didn't open it. I just touched the edge of the cardboard. Not to relive it, to remember what boundaries cost and what they protect. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought stability meant silence. They thought documentation was cruelty. Now they understood something else. Documentation is protection, boundary is self-respect, and independence is not abandonment. It is clarity. I closed the cabinet and locked it. Then I walked back into the kitchen and poured another cup of coffee. The townhouse didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a foundation. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the next crisis. I was living inside the quiet I had chosen. The first time Victoria came to one of my workshops, she sat in the back row and didn't speak. She arrived early and chose the chair closest to the wall, as if she wanted the option to leave quickly if it became too uncomfortable. I noticed her the moment she walked in, but I didn't acknowledge it. The session was held in a small community center room in Evanston. Folding chairs, coffee in a paper urn, a whiteboard behind me with 3 words written in blue marker: access, control, documentation. The women in the room ranged from late 40s to early 70s. Some had notebooks open. Some folded their arms tightly across their chests. Most carried stories heavier than the room could hold in one afternoon. I began the way I always did. Financial manipulation doesn't start with theft, I said. It starts with permission. Heads nodded. Temporary access, shared passwords, emotional leverage. The language is always soft. Temporary. Precautionary. Exploratory. I didn't look at Victoria, but I felt her listening. We talked about incremental escalation, how secondary access becomes primary influence, how emotional framing, stress, burnout, instability can be used to justify control. One woman in the front row raised her hand. "My son says I'm not good with online banking," she said quietly. "He wants to manage my retirement account for me." The room went silent. "Has anyone evaluated your capacity?" I asked gently. "No." "Have you missed payments?" "No." "Then this isn't about capacity," I said. "It's about control." Victoria shifted in her chair. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. Another woman spoke up. "My sister needed a loan for her wedding," she said. "It was temporary." Temporary. The word echoed again. "How long ago?" I asked. 2 years. "And has it been repaid?" The woman shook her head. We talked for 2 hours, about boundaries, about documentation, about not equating love with unlimited access. At the end of the session, several women stayed behind. Victoria waited until the room cleared before approaching me. "You didn't mention me," she said. "I don't need to," I replied. She nodded. "It's strange hearing it from the outside," she said. "It sounds obvious." "It never feels obvious when you're inside it." She looked down at her hands. "I thought I was helping," she admitted. "Were you?" I asked. She hesitated. "I thought if we consolidated everything before the wedding, we'd look stable, secure." "Look stable," I repeated. "Yes." "Not be stable," she swallowed. "No." The distinction mattered. Optics had always driven her. Admiration, image, the illusion of success. "I confused access with partnership," she said quietly. "And control with safety," I added. She nodded. The honesty wasn't dramatic. It was tired, earned. 2 weeks later, the 6th repayment installment arrived. Structured, predictable. Victoria texted me a simple message afterward. It processed. No apology, no commentary, just acknowledgement. I appreciated that more than anything elaborate. One evening, she asked if I would have dinner with her in her new apartment. I agreed. Her place was smaller than the condo had been, clean, minimal, no bridal magazines, no unopened vendor packages, just a couch, a dining table for two, and framed photographs of her college friends. No engagement photos, no champagne toasts frozen in time. She served pasta and wine without ceremony. "I sold the ring," she said casually. I looked up. "Used it to pay down part of the settlement." "That was smart," I said. She laughed softly. "You would say that." "Yes." We ate in silence for a few minutes. "I keep replaying the storage unit," she said finally. "What about it?" "How organized it was." "It was strategic," I said. She winced slightly. "He told me once that risk is easier to manage when you isolate the variable," she said. "And you were the variable?" I asked. She nodded. "I thought if I convinced you to share everything, it would remove the risk." "The risk was never me," I said. "I know that now." The difference between knowing and admitting had once been miles wide. Now it was shrinking. After dinner, she walked me to the door. "I don't expect us to go back to how we were," she said. "We won't," I replied. "Is that bad?" "No." She looked confused. "It's honest." Honesty had replaced illusion. That was progress. Later that month, I received an email from one of the workshop attendees. She had confronted her daughter about shared credit card access, removed it, set boundaries. "I feel guilty," she wrote, "but also relieved." Relief and guilt often travel together, I responded carefully. Guilt fades when safety stabilizes. The words felt true, not theoretical. Victoria attended the next workshop too. This time she spoke. "I signed something without reading it carefully," she told the group, "because I trusted the person who drafted it." The room was silent. "I thought I was protecting us," she continued, "but I was participating." Participating. The accountability was clear. No one judged her. Several nodded in recognition. Afterward, she looked lighter, not absolved, just aligned. The repayments continued. Automatic, trackable. The legal file remained in my locked cabinet, unopened, but present. One Saturday morning, Victoria helped me plant flowers in the small backyard of the townhouse. We worked quietly, dirt under our nails, no spreadsheets, no transaction logs, just soil and sunlight. "At least you're not auditing the fertilizer receipts," she joked. I smiled. "Not yet." We both laughed. It wasn't the laughter of avoidance. It was the laughter of distance from crisis. When she left that afternoon, she paused at the gate. "Thank you for not cutting me off completely," she said. "I didn't cut you off," I replied. "I cut off access." She nodded slowly. "I see the difference now." That was the real shift. Not forgiveness, understanding. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought stability meant silence. They thought documentation was cruelty. Now they understood something else. Documentation is protection. Boundary is not punishment. And family without access can still exist. That night, I sat alone in my living room, lights dim, city quiet beyond the windows. The case file remained untouched in the cabinet. The repayment schedule continued. Victoria was rebuilding her life without illusion. And I was living mine without fear. The accounts were locked. The doors were locked. But the relationships were not. They were simply defined. And definition, I had learned, is what keeps love from turning into leverage. I turned off the lights and walked upstairs. For the first time in a long time, nothing felt precarious. It felt steady, chosen, protected, and finally, honest. The repayment schedule marked the months more clearly than any calendar ever had. Month 7, Month 8, Month 9. Each transfer arrived on the same day, at nearly the same minute, as if structure itself were keeping time for us. The notifications no longer made my pulse spike. They felt routine, predictable. Accountability converted into automation. One evening, as I was reviewing quarterly reports at my desk, an email from my attorney appeared. Subject line, Compliance Update. I opened it slowly. Ethan had attempted once more to modify his personal liability through a separate petition. The court denied it. Joint responsibility remained intact. I read the attached order carefully. Clear language. No ambiguity. Obligation remains binding. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. There would be no quiet revision of history. Documentation held. A few days later, my father called. His voice sounded older than I remembered. "Your mother and I have been talking," he said. "That's good," I replied. "We handled this poorly," he admitted. It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement. "We should have asked you directly," he continued, "instead of assuming." Assuming. The word carried weight. "I would have told you the truth," I said. "I know that now." There was a long pause. "I think we relied on you too much," he said quietly. Relying had once felt like praise. Now it felt like burden. "I won't carry what isn't mine anymore," I replied. He didn't argue. Later that week, Victoria invited me to attend a small networking event she was organizing for her event planning clients. It wasn't a wedding, it was a corporate fundraiser. She had rebuilt her professional identity quietly. No grand announcements, no curated social media presence, just work. When I arrived, she greeted me with a steady smile. "Thanks for coming," she said. "Of course." The venue was modest but elegant. Nothing excessive. No unnecessary grandeur. As she moved through the room greeting clients, I noticed something different. She wasn't performing. She was listening. She wasn't selling a fantasy. She was managing logistics. Control had shifted from illusion to competence. Later that night, after the event ended, we sat at a small table near the exit. "I thought status was safety," she said quietly. "It isn't," I replied. "I know that now." She looked at me carefully. "I don't blame you anymore," she said. "For what?" "For filing." I studied her expression. There was no resentment in it, just clarity. "I don't blame you for locking the accounts," she added. I nodded once. That mattered. The repayment notification for month 10 arrived the following morning. Automatic. Clean. Logged. I archived it without comment. That afternoon, I received an email from one of the women who had attended my workshops months earlier. She wrote that she had restructured her estate plan, removed secondary account access from her nephew, and updated her power of attorney documentation. "I didn't realize how vulnerable I was," she wrote. Vulnerable. The word echoed. Vulnerability without awareness invites exploitation. Vulnerability with documentation invites protection. I responded with encouragement and closed my laptop. That evening, I walked through my townhouse slowly. The space felt lived in now. Bookshelves filled, plants thriving near the windows. The office organized. No lingering sense of disruption, just continuity. Victoria stopped by unannounced a few days later. Not frantic, not emotional, just casual. "I wanted to show you something," she said. She handed me a printed statement. Her credit score report. Improved. Incrementally. "I'm rebuilding," she said. "I see that," I replied. "I didn't realize how much of my life was built on someone else's stability," she added. The sentence was quiet but honest. "I won't build like that again." "Good," I said. She looked around the house again. "You look peaceful," she said. "I am." She smiled faintly. "You don't seem angry anymore." "I'm not." That surprised her. "I thought you'd always resent me," she admitted. "I resented the behavior," I said. "Not you." The distinction was important. She nodded slowly. "I'm still paying," she said. "I know." "And I will." "I know." There was no tension in the exchange, just structure. That night, I opened the locked cabinet in my office. I removed the box labeled case file and set it on the desk. I flipped through the 67 pages slowly. The highlighted totals, the crypto routing, the compliance summaries, the mediation agreement with its clean acknowledgement paragraph. It no longer felt like a wound. It felt like documentation of a boundary crossed and corrected. I placed everything back in order and locked the cabinet again. Record does not require constant revisiting. It requires preservation. The next morning, my mother called. "We're hosting Thanksgiving," she said cautiously. "We'd like you to come." I hesitated only briefly. "I'll be there." It would be the first major holiday since the wedding had collapsed. No fiancé, no bridal planning, no curated narrative, just family. That evening, Victoria texted me. "I'm nervous about Thanksgiving." "Why?" "Because it's different now." "Yes," I replied. "Is different bad?" "No." Different meant honest. Thanksgiving arrived with crisp air and subdued conversation. No one mentioned the lawsuit, no one referenced the wedding. But something fundamental had shifted. My parents asked my opinion before assuming it. Victoria didn't defer or dominate. She participated. At one point, my father raised his glass slightly. "To new beginnings," he said. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't ceremonial, it was enough. Later that night, as I drove back to Evanston, I realized something quietly profound. The family had not shattered. It had recalibrated, not perfectly, not romantically, but realistically. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought stability meant silence. They thought documentation was betrayal. Now they understood something else. Documentation was preservation, boundary was alignment, and independence was not abandonment. It was responsibility. When I pulled into my driveway and stepped inside my townhouse, the quiet felt earned. Not because there was no conflict in the world, but because the conflict had been faced, documented, corrected. The repayment schedule would continue. The case file would remain locked. Victoria would keep rebuilding, and I would keep living without apology. I turned off the lights and walked upstairs. For the first time in a long time, nothing felt unresolved. It felt structured, defined, and entirely mine. The morning the 12th repayment cleared, I didn't check my phone right away. I was standing in my kitchen, sunlight pouring across the counter, coffee steaming in my hand, when the notification finally buzzed. For a moment, I just let it sit there. Not because I was afraid, because I no longer needed to react. When I did open it, the amount processed cleanly, on time, automated, no pleading messages attached, no dramatic texts. Just structure doing what structure is designed to do. I set the phone down and looked around my townhouse slowly. The hardwood floors, the framed abstract painting above the couch, the small herb garden thriving near the back window. Everything in this space existed because I had chosen it, not because someone needed access to it, not because someone needed to consolidate it, but because it was mine. 6 months ago, I had stood in a mediation room listening to my sister admit she signed documents she didn't fully understand. A year ago, I had stood in my own condo holding 67 pages of transaction records while my family accused me of overreacting. 18 months ago, I said yes because I thought helping meant proving love. Now I understand something different. Helping without boundary is not love. It's surrender. I walked into my office and unlocked the cabinet. The case file still sat on the top shelf. I took it down carefully and opened it for the first time in weeks. The highlighted numbers, the crypto routing logs, the acknowledgement paragraph in the settlement agreement. Respondents acknowledged that funds were accessed and utilized beyond agreed permissions. It wasn't dramatic language. It didn't need to be. It was permanent. I closed the file and placed it back in the cabinet. Then I changed the lock code, not because I expected anyone to break in. Because I could. Control feels different when it's chosen, not reclaimed. Victoria came over that afternoon without calling first. She stood on the porch holding a small potted plant. "For the backyard," she said. I stepped aside and let her in. She walked through the living room slowly, like she always did now, Not as someone measuring what she could take, but as someone appreciating what exists. "You look lighter," she said. "I am," I replied. She set the plant on the kitchen counter. "I made my last independent credit payment today," she said quietly. "Good." "I never thought I'd say this," she added, "but the structure saved me." I studied her. "In what way?" "It forced me to see it," she said. "All of it, the way I justified it, the way I let someone else steer." She wasn't crying, she wasn't dramatic, she was clear. "I thought you were being cruel," she continued, "when you locked everything." "I wasn't." "I know." She looked around the room. "I thought stability meant being attached to someone with more," she said. "Now I think it means being accountable for what's yours." "That's closer," I replied. She smiled faintly. "I don't need access," she said again. "I just need honesty." "And you have that," I said. When she left, the house felt exactly as it had before she arrived. Not shaken, not tense, just steady. Later that evening, I walked into the backyard and planted the small pot near the fence. The soil was cool, the air was quiet. I pressed the earth down firmly around the roots and stood up slowly. I thought about the day I locked all my accounts. How extreme it had felt. How final. How terrifying it seemed to choose documentation over emotional harmony. But harmony built on silence isn't harmony. It's imbalance waiting to collapse. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought stability meant silence. They thought that because I was disciplined, I would also be compliant. They confused calm with weakness. They confused love with access. They confused family with entitlement. What I learned at 32 is simpler than any court filing. Family is not unlimited access. Love is not financial permission. Trust requires boundaries. And independence is not cruelty. It is clarity. When I walk through my house now, I don't feel like I reclaimed something stolen. I feel like I defined something that had never been properly defined before. My accounts are secure. My home is in my name alone. My relationship with my sister exists without shared passwords or hidden drafts. The case file remains locked, not because I'm waiting to use it, but because I respect what it represents: evidence, consequence, growth. If you've ever felt pressured to sacrifice your stability for someone else's comfort, I want you to think about this for a moment. What would you have done the day the transfers crossed the line? Would you have locked the account sooner? Would you have confronted them privately? Would you have walked away entirely? Tell me. Because these conversations matter more than we admit. They matter for daughters who are called selfish for protecting their savings, for sisters told they're cold for setting limits, for mothers who feel guilty for removing access from adult children. If this story resonates with you, stay with me. There are more conversations to have, more truths to unpack, more stories about family, manipulation, boundaries, and the quiet kind of revenge that doesn't destroy. It restores. Subscribe if you believe protecting your peace is not betrayal. Comment if you've ever had to change the password on something bigger than a bank account, because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can say is not yes, it's enough, and sometimes locking the account is the moment she finally unlocks her life.